Everybody, wait a minute. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Yes, welcome back everybody to I Mix What I Like. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come on in. Please do all of the things. And yeah, welcome. Welcome. Greetings. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be or when you may be. And yeah, look forward to a little bit, like I said, a snowy live for some of us, for a lot of us here in the United States. And it looks like more to come. In fact, that was something I had meant for us to look at as a little bit of a story. But yeah, I hope all is relatively well. Please do come on in, like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, if at all possible. And do the same, of course, for Black Liberation Media as well. And let's get into a couple of things. Why not? Why not? Yeah, I haven't started looking at this Wonder Man. I'm hoping for some critiques of it from Black Liberation Media cadre. Okay, all right. Well, we'll see. What's up, Raul? But okay, let's check into a couple of things. I got a couple of things. So first of all, I wanted to thank everybody for helping this platform cross now the 15,000 subscriber mark and continuing to grow. And thank you all very much. And to the extent you haven't joined everyone, please do. So thank you all and welcome. Well, just quickly, I didn't really look into too many things about this, but I did see some stories over the last couple of days that I just wanted to, and I hope to come back to at some point, maybe with some others, that to talk more about the discussions, to the extent that I don't know how serious they've gotten yet, that there would be some significant boycotts of the forthcoming World Cup here in the United States, Canada, and Mexico this summer. And there's the including Sepp Blatter, the Sepp Blatter, the former head of FIFA, saying people should boycott given Trump's tyranny in the world and Europe and all that and this, that, and the third. And it's funny that, given his track record and accusations of alleged uh, corruption, that he's taking such a now a principled stance. Uh, but France, some high up in France, and more recently even the German Federation, uh, soccer federation, football federation, have apparently put on the table not participating in the World Cup this summer. And then I've seen others have a discussion of saying that maybe the European teams would only play in Canada and Mexico, leaving the United States stadiums to have other games, but certainly missing a lot of the top, more popular and revenue generating countries like Germany, France. I've seen Spain discussed as part of this. And and all I can say is I hope so. I hope nobody goes to any of these games in any of these countries, but particularly here in the United States. FIFA giving an award to Trump suggests, never mind the history, but suggests to me that even with this discussion of going to Mexico or Canada to see games, it's still a FIFA run event, and I think it should be boycotted and challenged and protested to the fullest extent possible, uh, legally and peacefully, of course. But absolutely, nobody should be going to these games. And I'm going to do my best. Even I don't know, to be honest, it'll be difficult, but the boycott should extend to not even watching virtually, and certainly not paying for it. But I'll see what I can do to resist, at least that much. But I would absolutely, if I do tune in, I would want to tune in to see empty stadiums. Uh, and or I was trying to think of what if the proposal was you only, if you were to go to a game, you only go to your home country's game and that's it, or something like that. I don't know. I don't really know. But to the extent that people are talking about not participating, I'm all for it, and I hope a whole bunch of people don't participate. I've seen debates, some debates online suggesting in some of the sports spaces, that it's not likely, and when this, that, and the third, and what about the players and their careers and their chances to participate and all this other kind of stuff. And I don't really care about all that, because what about the people suffering genocide, and what about the people being told they can't come to this country and aren't wanted in this country, and what about people being told the United States is going to turn their country into the 51st state of this country? Like, I mean, I would it seems to me everybody should be upset. There's so many reasons to not want to support. But I've certainly told those in my small loved ones circles that we're not going to any games. We had talked about it at one point, but absolutely not at this point. And it should have been boycotted even before all of this. So, okay, so just that, yeah. So I'm all for, like, everybody should, right, yeah. And then for all you non-fans, it's easy. Oh, definitely. And again, I mean, you know, Pulisic and others who are Trump supporters and Republicans and all this other kind of stuff. Uh, uh, the only good news is that there's not likely to be that many opportunities for him to celebrate. He ain't gonna be scoring no goals. So, yeah, let's yeah, I saw some of this too, Hangover, that hotel 38,000 hotel reservations have been canceled and all kinds of, I hope it continues. I really hope it continues. and peace to Senegal for winning Africa. And I hope you all saw that finale. I mean, that was a crazy end of a game. Um, but U.S. is still allowed to participate. I think Israel too. Right? Yeah. No, Israel, U.S. should not be participating. And again, the only positive potentially in all of that is that neither of one of those countries is likely to do that well. Welcome, welcome, welcome. OP 8828. I'm no fan. I am the Heat. Okay. Uh so okay, yeah. All right. So interestingly enough, yeah, I'll do it. It doesn't matter what. Interestingly enough, so I was sent something the other day and it reminded me of something else. So let's take a look at let's take a look. Whoops, whoops. Here, let me refresh, get the sound on.
You know, people talk about Baltimore like it's one city, but it's two different development realities, right? And before y'all start thinking I'm on my soapbox, there's actually been studies around this. Okay, I learned this while I was at my Johns Hopkins class. Have y'all heard of the WhiteL versus the BlackButterfly? Child, this beef stew and grits is so good. So Baltimore researchers and community lenders use this language to show sort of where the investment goes, right? So you have the WhiteL, which happens to be like Canton, the harbor, and a little bit up from there. And then the BlackButterfly is everything outside of that. And this language has been used for decades. So if you ever wondered why
Not quite decades, and I'm going to show you in a moment where this in terms of the language of the WhiteL and the BlackButterfly, which is how Baltimore is often described in terms of the segregation and where the investment goes is being described here. And by the way, just as I'll hopefully remind myself to say again in a minute, at 4 p.m. today, I am re-releasing and premiering the episode 2 of my almost 10 years ago now series, Academics in Cars, which will feature Dr. Lawrence Brown talking about the WhiteL and the BlackButterfly and the history of this concept. That's going to premiere today at 4 p.m. Eastern. So come back for that, please, and check that out, where you'll hear more of this discussion and some of the history behind what is being discussed here. But I'm going to play a clip of that in a minute. But definitely come back at 4 o'clock to see the whole thing, as I move the at least some of the remaining Academics and Cars episodes back over here. One of my favorite projects, admittedly, but okay, yeah.
Canton looks a certain type of way and West Baltimore Street looks another kind of way.
In other words, the segregation, the intentional segregation and uneven investment, that is very old, obviously, but the language of the WhiteL BlackButterfly isn't as old. That's the point I really meant. That's all.
And the amount of investment is different for both of those. I'm not one to gossip, but it's on purpose. And this has even become more evident in rebuilding the mess over West. The gap financing that we need is astronomical compared to some other projects. And this is just not a development conversation when you think about it. Commercial quarters shape walkability, access to healthy things, where you work, where you live. It's a really important conversation because your environment plays so much on your health, where you feel safe, where you feel nervous, where you feel nurtured. And then we get to start to thinking about the health divide and closing gaps in care. Now it makes sense why we got
and access to food deserts, all those kinds of things that still exist in Baltimore as well. All of that is part of the environment being discussed. So absolutely.
6 liquor stores and 1 grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, people talk about Baltimore like it's one city.
All right. So I was sent that couple days ago, sort of a reintroduction of this concept. So, as I said, it's gonna re-premiere today at 4 p.m. in its entirety. But I wanted to play a segment of that discussion that I had with Professor Lawrence Brown back in 2018 as part of this Academics and Cars series I was doing, which was a lot of fun. I put up a few of the episodes back on the channel, starting, of course, with the first one, which was me, Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows, and Dr. Haight, as we left the one of the early showings of the first Black Panther film back in the day as well. So it was the first episode of Academics and Cars, is the three of us critiquing, and I think still the best review of that film to this day is also on the channel now as well. So, but let's go back and hear a little bit more about this WhiteL and BlackButterfly as it's been discussed in Baltimore, the segregation in Baltimore, the category 5 segregation, as he says, in this episode. And it's interesting that he said that, as we're getting news of Baltimore being hit with what they're saying this weekend, a bomb cyclone. This nor'easter winter bomb cyclone. That's wild. But in any event, let's just a few minutes of this interview with Dr. Lawrence Brown back when he was my colleague at Morgan State University in 2018, talking about the WhiteL and the Black Butterfly.
We are living in a society that's highly advanced in terms of technology and medicine. America is a leading country in that sense. But when you compare our outcomes to other developed countries, we actually rank very poorly in terms of, infant mortality, in terms of like longevity in life. We're like at the bottom of developed countries. So it goes to show that, even though we have all this technology, there's not a lot of equity. There's not a lot of democracy in the way that these technologies and access to resources are deployed. And that's really a function of, like I was looking at in my dissertation, the neighborhoods in which we live, which were structured by a particular sort of white supremacist ideology in terms of racial segregation. And like this road that we're on right now, York Road, right, this is a real dividing line, like in the city. When I look at this on a map, to the west we have, pretty much the WhiteL, and to the right we have the Black Butterfly. So like this community to the right over here.
Look, this is crazy. Yeah. I was just in a meeting and this is actually related to what I wanted to talk to you about today, with one of my new colleagues in the Institute for Urban Research.
Right.
Glenn Robinson, I think is his. Do you know him?
I don't.
But anyway, this is the first. Yesterday, I'm from DC, grew up in Howard County, did spend a little bit of time educationally in a Quaker private school in Charles Street in 8th and 9th grade. Right. But that's my experience with Baltimore.
Right.
Other than the 11 years I've been working at Morgan. And I have to admit, yesterday was the first time I heard the WhiteL Black Butterfly description.
Right.
So for all of the late passes like me and those who might not understand Baltimore, break that down as we drive north on York Road.
Yeah.
The what you were just talking about, the WhiteL and the Black Butterfly.
Well, I think when I came here in 2010, people were already, I thought I heard this term WhiteL, like basically in the center of the city. Right. You run down, and we're actually approaching Roland Park, Guilford, Homeland, like all of this is in the northern part of the city. And you just run down the middle of the city, where you go down and you end up Remington, Charles Village, downtown, Midtown Belvedere, and you run south along Charles Street in St. Paul, and you get to downtown in Inner Harbor, and then you bank east along Alice Anna, and you're hitting like Federal Hill, Canton. You're hitting those neighborhoods that are going along the waterfront, and that's sort of the white L, like in the center of the city and then along the waterfront going east on Alisana. That's where the large majority of our white population is concentrated. And the sort of easternmost boundary of the white L is the road that we're on right now, York Road.
So just
that
real
was
quick,
the white L.
Wow. Okay. So just real quick, we're gonna come back to this. This is what I was talking about. My colleagues at the Institute for Urban Research and Glenn Robinson, one of the senior faculty members in that institute, who's done a lot of work on transportation, a lot of very interesting work that I'm just now catching up to, unfortunately, late again to.
Right. We're heading to the county now.
Okay, so we're about to loop back in because I want to stay in the city for this, but maybe you can talk quickly about this county division. But I just want to point out that Glenn Robinson does a lot of this work, and we have already talked about we're going to be doing an episode of Academics and Cars with him. Specifically at some point to get like a full detailed tour of not only the city, but as per his research, exactly how and why the transportation system and roads and streets are set up and how they're changing and how they, of course, end up unfortunately negatively impacting the poorer and blacker elements of the city. So there's a lot of politics to, and what I was asking was why, I want to know the politics behind why I'm stuck in traffic. So it'd be perfect to be in traffic with him talking about that. So anyway, so as we hit, you're saying we're hitting the end here of the north end of the white L.
Yeah, and you know, Baltimore really is a hyper-segregated city, Category 5. When you look at the research of Douglas Massey out of the Princeton University, you know, he's talked about for a long time, him and his colleague Nancy Denton wrote the book American Apartheid. Right. And really sort of described, you know, the way in which, you know, several cities in America remain hyper-segregated.
So what does Category 5 mean exactly?
It's the absolute worst. It's like a hurricane. And so
oh, man.
when you're talking about Category 5...
I just did a Category 5 U-turn.
Very definitely, I might add.
Right, okay.
You know, real smooth. U-turn right there. But yeah, Category 5 is, I mean, basically there's 5 different categories: low, moderate, high, hyper-segregation Category 4, and hyper-segregation Category 5. And Baltimore is in the Category 5, which is the most hyper-segregated a city can get in terms of the indices that they use. And so, and that makes sense because where we are right now, where we're driving, you know, is a part of that story about how Baltimore became such a hyper-segregated city. Baltimore invented racial zoning in 1910. And basically pioneered another construct called racially restrictive covenants right in this area that we're driving in, North Baltimore. These communities that were developed by the Roland Park Company. The Roland Park Company developed Baltimore neighborhoods that are like Roland Park, Guilford, Homeland, and later Northwood, which is near our campus, the original Northwood. So they had a competitor named Forest Park and so Company. The Forest Park Company, that's in West Baltimore. They developed like Forest Park, Ashburton, and so these type of communities, they utilized and deployed racially restricted covenants, which are deeds, the home covenant, the deed for your home, basically saying, hey, welcome to your home. So glad for you to live in the community. You can't do this, you can't do that. Shrubs got to be cut, yard needs to be mowed, and by the way, when you sell the home, you cannot sell to Negroes. And so it restricted where black people could live. And Baltimore pioneered both of those. Or this area, which actually was a part of the county at the time, was later annexed by the city 100 years ago in the spring of 1918. So Baltimore is like created and helped facilitate the erection of American apartheid. And so that's what we have here. Category 5, hyper-segregated city. And it plays out in so many different ways, like the white L and the BlackButterfly, where you have, you know, east of York Road, west of 83, where the majority of people of African descent live in this city.
And this is just, and those are meant as descriptions. So if you're looking down at a map of the city, and you'll see what will end up looking like a white L and a black butterfly of segregation.
Right, and I coined the term BlackButterfly
Oh,
back
really?
in 2015. Yeah,
That's you?
That was me.
That's you?
That's me.
So as my colleague Dr. Heaton I was saying, that's you?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Because literally, if you look at...
I didn't even know that. We were just getting... So please do come back at 4:00 today and watch the premiere of that whole discussion. And because it was wild at the time, I didn't know that he was the one who would, essentially, at least said he had coined that phrase. So, like I said, please, come on back and check that entire discussion later on today. It'll premiere again at 4:00. So, and the link to his book. So that interview took place in 2018. The link to purchase his book, I know it's in the show description for the video that'll drop at 4. But he published his book in 2022, I believe. So we were getting an advanced look at that. So, all right, pushing right along. You know what? Glenn Robinson. So unfortunately, and that's another story, some of which has been told in Patreon and channel members only videos about both how my work was stolen and my fraught path to full professor. Those two videos are, I think if you see them, understandably kept behind members only and Patreon walls. It's not, again, just for the sake of membership and Patreon support, which is, of course, appreciated. But if you see, you'll see why it's, I think, necessary to hold that there for at least now. But unfortunately, those stories ended up impacting my time at the Institute for Urban Research, which you heard me mention there, and the interview with Robinson. Our work never got to take place. So, and I haven't seen or heard from any of those folks over there in years. So, just one of those things. And but the work sounded fascinating. I just never followed through or was able to follow through with that. So, this is really light work considering a couple of things I definitely want to get to and really want to spend some time with. I didn't even plan on this until late last night, early this morning. But I came across a 1993 panel on the film, on Spike Lee's Malcolm X film, that sort of, as an early Black History Month, early commemoration of Malcolm X, I thought we would look at because it's fascinating. And it's interesting to see some of the familiar faces that pop up in there. So we'll look at that in a few minutes. But no, I appreciate it. And as bad as my stories got, I still have relatively, knock on wood, come out pretty good compared to some of my colleagues. But yeah. Okay. So let me pull up the light work just because it just keeps happening. It's just so wild. EssenceMagazine back to tell us that Black buying power will top $2 trillion in 2026. So why are brands still missing the mark? And again, I know it's not reported properly in a direct way, but if you catch this, they are in a way, I mean, in many ways, they snitch on themselves if we're paying attention. Because if you're an Essence magazine, if you are, which is back to being Black owned, if you are purporting to talk to Black audiences as part of a Black media environment. Now, I haven't done it since I published the book a few years ago, so I don't know to what extent there's been any changes, but when I did look initially, there's nowhere near anything that approaches balance, much less if between discussion of Black economics from the perspective of entrepreneurialism and Black capitalism and a discussion of Black economics from the position of radical critiques. There's no balance. There's nothing that approaches balance. So it's not like we get these stories and then we also do get stories that reflect the accurate data and research depicting the condition of Black people here in the United States or elsewhere as it regards economics or anything else. So that problem is worsened when we are encouraged to read these $2 trillion numbers and to see that as some sort of economic strength, when there's never in these outlets, there's close to never any accurate or honest discussion of the economy. And then, as they say here in the very next part of the headline, so why are brands missing the mark? So in other words, my point is, if you are a Black media outlet targeting Black audiences and you want them to be properly informed about the economy and their relationship to it, why is it so often that the perspective comes from, as it says here, brands, marketers, advertisers, corporations, businesses, and entrepreneurs who are looking to get a rate of return on their advertising investment? And that rate of return, of course, is the consumption of Black consumers spending what little is held by them in the economy on those products. And it's again another appeal to the business community to stop getting Black audiences so egregiously wrong. One big issue, they say here, treating Black viewers whose buying power is expected to exceed $2 trillion in 2026 as a monolith, rather than showing complexity in life experience. Now, again, to paraphrase the late, great Glenn Ford, why would any properly functioning, politically educated community not want to be seen as a monolith? This thing we still hear too many Black commentators say proudly, we're not a monolith. We're a diverse community like anyone else. As to suggest some sort of pride, when in reality it's a confession that you want no national unity, that is Black nationhood, nationalist unity, and you want no actual political power as a racialized community, because you want to project yourself as being assimilated and integrated as anyone else into all the other diverse opinions in society, while the rest are actively advocating on behalf, even narrowly and myopically and backward in reactionary way, on behalf of their own so-called racialized or national community. And then all of them are ignoring the class divisions within those communities, as is encouraged in these kinds of reports. And then again, according to Nielsen's 15th annual Black Diverse Intelligence Series, a whopping 71% of Black audiences still feel misrepresented by this, misrepresented because of this. The report, which dives into the relationships between Black audiences and U.S. media, highlights several areas where media has an opportunity to improve. Now, again, I'm showing you here my PDF copy so that I don't have to worry about losing access to various things that are online. But just to show you quickly, when you click that link in the story for quote unquote this report, it takes you back to this report that I've shown you several times already from Nielsen. And then it shows you again, just as a recap of the distribution of the myth. Nielsen is getting this claim of $2 trillion in buying power from, of course, the Selig Center for Economic Growth and the Terry College of Business in the University of Georgia. And I think they've either changed it or taken the name off of it. It used to be in the Bank of America building. And again, the Selig Center, as it says in their own documents, only exists to help Georgia, that is the state of Georgia here in the United States, the state of Georgia and their businesses properly allocate advertising resources so to again get the highest rates of return. These reports are not meant to explain to Black audiences their actual relationship to the economy or their economic condition. And as they say in their own reports, their numbers are, quote, estimates and projections. They have no real way of determining this buying power. They're just extrapolating based on consumer research data. So it's just yet again these recycled claims come from the same nonsense and nowhere places, and but just keep coming back. And as they point out, as I talked about when I talked about the Nielsen report the first time, they keep talking about the impact Black consumers have on attracting the attention of white owned corporations like Gap. And to a certain extent, this reporting is accurately describing what buying power is, because it's only a measurement, to the extent it is a measurement at all, of anyone's ability to enrich those who own the economy. So they're talking about it only in the context of enriching Gap or having Black-owned brands nominally like Dapper Dan and Wunmi Musaku's dressing fashion bought up and tied up with Gap Studio. Or Black fan interest in the WNBA, which is owned by the NBA. Or here's an even better one. Something similar rings true for anime. The report found that 43% of Black Gen Z respondents are anime fans. So if you own anime or produce anime, and here's a way to reach out to another segment of the economy that or society that might benefit you. But it, again, has nothing to do with the condition economically or the political power of Black communities. It's just more absolute absurdity. But it comes from EssenceMagazine, dressed up as Black-owned media and Black community concern, absent the Black class position of the magazine and its owners, who only want to promote Black buying power so that white corporations who would give them ad revenue are likely to do so. So it becomes, unfortunately, again, Black entrepreneurial, bourgeois, middle class owners of media outlets selling their audiences to advertisers. And part of that sale is in the mythological promotion of this buying power idea, a subsidiary of Black capitalism, and this idea that Black people have more strength in this economy and this economic system than we think we do, and only fail to take advantage of our opportunity. And it's absolute concocted nonsense. All right. So as a corrective measure, this semester, I'm doing something that, on the one hand, I am quietly patting myself on the back for, but on the other, I am condemning myself for having taken so long to do it. And that is no more excerpts, no more dancing around it and just talking about it. We are using as the text for my intro to Black Studies class, George Jackson's Blood in My Eye. And we're going to read the entire book this semester. And the point that I'm making with the students is actually, is exactly right. That all of the histories and themes that are dominant in the history, in the historical rise of the field of Black studies, and that dominate to this day the debates and analyses and frames and interests in Black studies are brought up by George. I don't think, save for the evolving and increasing amount of literature around LGBTQ and queer studies and maybe Africana womanism and some extensions from the foundation that obviously over the last 50 years he couldn't have kept up with the literature on. George lays out the foundation for all of these discussions almost perfectly. And so my favorite book yet again proves its value. And as I'm rereading it yet again, it just is the gift that keeps on giving and makes so many of the points that I'm trying to make, not only in these ongoing series around buying power, but this, again, I'll just keep speaking it, this forthcoming project I'm trying to work on eventually to produce that involves a lot of what I'm doing, talking about here, which is a rebranding of Black radicalism. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. A rebranding of Black radicalism. So just a couple of quick points. I just wanted to bring up really one or two things. I mean, I could sit here. I really love this book, and I know that there's so many details and nuances and I understand George was just a human being. Okay, but damn it, I love this book, man. I love the way it's written. I love the vibe. I love the intent. I love everything, really everything about it, and I love the way it's written, how it's written, everything. So, all right, but even from the part that he didn't write this preface from, I always forget the name, Gregory Armstrong. We're reminded of well, first of all, that George dedicates the book to the Black communist youth, to their fathers. We will now criticize the unjust with the weapon. And then getting Blood in My Eye as a title from the statement his mother sends him after trying to visit his brother's grave and seeing the state it was of its condition, and she angrily says, "Blood in my eye," and it's. But as Armstrong says, quoting George, or no, in this case, quoting Jean Genet, is that how you say her name? His name, Jean Genet. That the book is both a weapon of liberation and a poem of love. And I think that's well said. And that it grew out of a perfect love and perfect hate. That George was a consummate organizer, that he was serious, he was committed, that he suffered the worst. I mean, I almost forgot how much he suffered in terms of his youth and within prison, and what it meant to be in what did they call those cells? And I mean, how much time he spent in isolation, the strip cells that he was, you know, forced to suffer. I mean, he was. But in that context, as he says, he evolved this brilliant analysis that even if we narrow it to the point I'm trying to focus on just a little bit here today around the rebranding symbolically of Black radicalism, but specifically our economic analysis. I mean, he says so much just right out the gate that is I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. So I mean, the first letter, you know, speaking of my use of it in Black Studies and what we'll be talking about when the students probably, I don't know, probably they're getting some background materials now, so maybe next week we'll start this. But he says right out the gate, we've gone through approximately the same changes since they separated us. The confused flight to national revolutionary Africa through the riot stage of revolutionary Black America. We have finally arrived at a scientific revolutionary socialism with the rest of the colonial world. So even just in that one statement to his comrade, he's talking about so many of the issues that are still prevalent and dominant in the field of Black studies. That is both the naming of it, Black, Africana, Africological, Africology, African world, you know, African American, African diaspora, but this immediate connection of revolutionary Black struggle to the continent of Africa and the incorporation of socialism. So much of Black studies from the beginning. Last semester, we celebrated what was the 50th anniversary of Black studies, calling in 1975 for the field to be used as an anti-imperial weapon. Recognizing the colonialism it created, that imperialism creates internationally, but even internally. George, of course, talks almost immediately within the first few pages of the Black and brown internal colonies. So there's just so many things. Now, obviously, it's a different approach from a standard textbook, but it's still introducing us, inviting us to or allowing us to affix the specifics of the development of Black studies to what he's saying here, and the purpose for Black studies, or what some at least have said is the purpose of Black studies as a field. But then he's immediately already on page 4, and this was the note so the note I put to myself here and why I wanted to bring this up this morning was this point that I keep making that I'm increasingly wanting to confront in this forthcoming project is the dissemination of white right-wing thought through blackface. And what George was saying here was the precursor to what June Jordan would talk about some years later, and that I talked about in the video the other day. And so a precursor to what June Jordan had to say and to what I'm saying about people like Andrew Young today. So, for instance, on page 4, George writes, "It's really annoying to hear Blacks express right-wing traditionalist political ideals. I mean, the same spiel that you get from Wallace, Maddox, Hearst, or Hunt, coming from Black people like Lomax, Young, Andrew, Bunch, Ralph. Some recently dead now, thanks to the forces of good." I'm assuming he meant Lewis Lomax, which is wow. But that's a whole other discussion. Lomax, who, on the one hand, you know, he had that interview with Malcolm. He wanted to help. He wanted to I forgot what he something about calling out the Nation of Islam. His cars, he has that strange car accident or something like that. And then, but he's talked about in here for his book, The Reluctant African, where George says, accuses him of being a CIA agent and writing sheer propaganda for the owner disguised in blackface. So my bias would suggest that everything George is saying here about Lomax and others is correct, but my point would be, even if he's not 100% correct in his claims or statements here, which I have no reason to doubt him, the point I'm getting at is that he was already calling out this attempt to supplant actual genuine militancy with its appearance in a black bourgeois form. So that's why he's calling out Andrew Young and Ralph Bunche. And then we see in 2026 how Andrew Young continues. I just did the video about the even recent, the other day, like a few days ago, produced Disney nonsense about Andrew Young and Dr. King playing basketball and creating revolutionaries on the basketball court and all this other nonsense, while not even acknowledging the actual militancy of Dr. King. And please go and see again there's a through line here through the video the other day about that, about June Jordan, the discussion I had yesterday with Two Black about nonviolence is violence too. There's a through line through that at least for my purposes here today starts with George. He said these are dangerous people. When we leap up to destroy the owner, we'll have these kinds of niggers to fight. They will use the tactic white left-wing causes to protect their bosses' white right-wing cause. So all I'm hearing him say 50, 60 years ago is what the problem we have today, that white liberalism couched in pragmatic, tactical, black advance is really reworked white conservatism meant to protect the white right-wing cause of the white bosses. So whether that boss is an advertising algorithm or whether it's a direct hierarchy, what we end up getting promoted to us are what are meant to replace the militant voices with the appearance of something that is meaning to speak to that, but is really replacing and marginalizing that. That's why we get the popular versions of black feminism, and June Jordan is marginalized. That's why we get Andrew Young and Dr. King is marginalized in his real politics, and George is just erased. Or as June Jordan would say, as we talked about the other day, you might hear from the civil rights establishment the fate of George Jackson. But he says, that as George says in here, you must teach that socialism, communalism is as old as man, and its principles form the basis of mostly all East African cultures. There is no word to denote possession in the original East African tongues. The only independent African societies today are socialistic. Those which allowed capitalism to remain are neo-colonies. So again, whether we're applying that to today, which would be appropriate, or just in terms of what I'm going to do with this semester, the field of Black studies is, I mean, so much of it is based in these claims, assessing these claims, debating these claims, various approaches to these claims. What did Erica Brown say the other day? There's no black dollar. She said the dollar is always white. Black people maybe get to touch it as it passes through their hands. But he says here, George, the good white people who own things will always give them, meaning the neo-colonial black bourgeoisie, a few inches in their papers or other media. That's how fascism works, influencing the masses and institutions through elites. This is why I'm saying, like, so much of the discussion of what's happening today in Minnesota and elsewhere, I don't mean to sound disrespectful or somehow I don't know, to diminish in any way, but a regular engagement with George makes it less shocking. It's maybe disturbing, it may be sad even, it may be frustrating, it may be scary even, what we're seeing happen around the country right now. But I don't think that we can, especially revisiting this, we can't claim that we haven't seen something similar, and certainly historically that we haven't seen even worse. And it is, and what George is doing, and what Black Studies should do, is he's laying down an analysis that you can assess with data, history, and in time, its predictive accuracy. And then he even says something that Erica and I and we were talking about on the remix the other day on Black Liberation Media, and that comes up that yes, while we have to condemn these neo-colonial and maybe even fight these neo-colonial rulers in our midst, he does say, but it's unfair to automatically condemn a Black person for not understanding economic and political subtleties. Some are simply confused in an honest way. So he says you must explain the economic motive of human social history and bring out that there are only two ways by which societies can ever be governed and organized for production of their needs: the various types of totalitarian methods represented by assorted capitalist and fascist arrangements, and the egalitarian method. That's it. And then he says, got to have socialism and dialectical materialism. And then he also says something that I was thinking also, again, was a precursor to what Two Black is saying in his latest that we talked about yesterday, Nonviolence is Violence Too. He says, then, comrade, you will encounter the faint-hearted, illogical types like Muhammad Ali. Whoops. Entertainer and tool of the capitalist cliques. Their line is, ain't nobody but Black folks gonna die in a revolution. This argument completely overlooks the fact that we always have done most of the dying and still do. Dying at the stake through social neglect or in US foreign wars. The point is now to construct a situation where someone else will join in the dying. If it fails and we have to do most of the dying anyway, we're certainly no worse off than before. Again, I'm just saying, I'm just reading this as it's like he's just prefiguring what Two Black is saying now, or trying to get people and what he's saying that again I hear in Two Black's work is stop claiming you want revolution or even progressive change while constantly finding ways to avoid the necessary confrontation. There has to be a confrontation. There is, in fact, an ongoing confrontation. It is just only really recognized and certainly weaponized by one side. And even when you say you're going to engage, quote unquote, peacefully or nonviolently, in this context, that is itself inviting, encouraging, welcoming, needing other forms of violence to make that act meaningful. Two Black says it and writes it much better than that. So check the discussion that we had yesterday about that. But he also says something in here that I know we're going to use. I'm going to use in this semester in terms of my Black Studies class to engage again this discussion of the materialist versus the cultural, or the cultural nationalist versus the revolutionary nationalist, or the Afrocentric versus the scientific socialist, or whatever. These ongoing debates that we still see happening all the time. When George writes, and he does this in the first few pages in a number of iterations, but he says, revolution within a modern industrial capitalist society can only mean the overthrow of all existing property relations and the destruction of all institutions that directly or indirectly support existing property relations. So on the one hand, to sort of my point about, today's snowy live stream, unfreezing our economic analysis thumbnail joke. He's right about property and property relations and that having to be overthrown, and even that is a strong critique I should work more from in arguing down black capitalist logic. But what I really like is that, to me, he's again saying he's satisfying using a version of an internal colonial model the contradiction between the Afrocentric and the materialist by saying, listen, we're talking about having a revolution within a modern industrial capitalist society. The specifics, as Marxists would often want to point out accurately in when they do it correctly, as I understand it, is that you do have to apply it to the specifics of your situation. The dialectical material method, et cetera, and so forth. Marxism has to be applied and adjusted to the specific time and place we find ourselves. So as I understand what he's saying here, and I would want to use it or argue it in class or bring it up in class and elsewhere, is to say, this isn't a denunciation. My interpretation wouldn't be, this isn't a denunciation of African-centered thought. It's saying that we can't ignore the materialist side because we have to start with the fact that we want a revolution from within a modern industrial capitalist society, or whatever the latest framing of what it is today. And that requires, I think, and he obviously did too, dialectical materialism, Marxism, socialism being involved in the development of that struggle. So I then he says on page 8, I even forgot about all it. I mean, he's talking about avoiding just a bourgeois revolution by saying we don't want to just replace the 1%. So even before Occupy and all that other stuff from decade whatever ago, he's saying if the 1% who presently control the wealth of society maintain their control after any reordering of the state, the changes cannot be said to be revolutionary. So you can't just be saying, I want to put myself over there and that will make it better. We can't just be saying we want to replace. He later says in here, we can't just assume, and he quotes Lenin and saying, we can't just assume control over the state as it's currently arranged. The state as it's currently arranged has to be destroyed so that a new society can be evolved. Otherwise, you're just going to end up replacing that 1% with a new 1%. Which is again my point about saying we need to add some depth to what are the two vague concepts of cooperative economics and Ujamaa and you know, whatever. That there needs to be some clarity, some material clarity put on that, so that we don't just end up replacing. Cooperative economics could end up meaning that again, a black wealthy ownership evolve. So quoting his brother Jonathan, I'm really with this part. And I'm wondering, trying to remember back if I was motivated by this when again I was when I was the last time I was really involved organizationally as we all should be. I was advocating that, as Jonathan Jackson is quoted here saying, the period of disorganized activity, of riots and rallies and purely political education has come to a close. I'm not going to sit here and say I definitely did not in real life, and I'm not now suggesting what Jonathan was saying as a result of the rest of that comment that you can finish reading on page 11. But I do agree with that part for sure. And my point was, we just need to spend more time building the organization, building our trust in one another, learning who we are, spending time with each other, and then figuring out what an overt act would look like. Because it's obviously it's too easy. It's not, you know, and again, I've somewhat changed over the years on this, and it had some public discussions about that. So I don't mean to disrespect people who are protesting and rightfully so out here making challenges and noise and doing all the things that they're doing. But I did feel then, and maybe things are changing or have changed, and I'm just not around enough to know. But I worry that too much of what is considered the work is just in producing various rallies and forms of political agitation and education, and not something more confrontational. Again, for YouTube, I'm not, or anywhere, I'm not advocating confrontation. I'm not advocating what George and what Jonathan said and did. I'm not doing that. I am saying some other forms of engagement need to take place. Okay. Yeah, so that's but essentially my point though is that Blood in My Eye is my favorite book. George is as right as I think you can be about so many things. And for the purposes of my class, I do think the book, I'd never read it for this purpose in this way, but in rereading it for this purpose, I think it does do a great job of saying here are all of the dominant themes that led Black people to move for the development of Black studies as a field of study. And then there's so much done in George's book addressing the dominant and still proliferating debates, discussions, themes, etc., in Black studies. So even as an even as an introduction to and then again, he's even writing at a time where Black studies was being, first forced onto campuses. So there are some overlaps there as well. But it's going to be, I'm looking forward to this semester. I'm looking forward to. Oh, and I missed a part. I made a note here that because when Two Black was talking about sacrificial sacrifice and sacrificial violence, the preface to this book reminds us, as I've talked about last year in Who Killed George Jackson, his death. Actually, I might have to ask Two Black more specifically what maybe we could all request that Two Black add some discussion of George in his follow-up to that piece, because they remind us in this preface that George, at least according to the affidavit and affidavits and statements made by his comrades and prisoners in San Quentin that day in August of 71, that George sacrificed himself. And that book, Who Killed George Jackson, raises this again, that George rushed the wall and the gate, intentionally drawing the fire to kill himself so that his comrades would not suffer the worst forms of abuse and torture and et cetera and so forth. So even in however it's described, rushing the gate, putting himself in a position to be shot by the guards, even if it is itself considered, I don't remember, was he armed or did they claim he was armed when they shot him? I think they claimed he was armed, or he was armed. But anyway, I'm trying to think of how the discussion with Two Black, that he was either non-violently engaging in a violent conflict to draw the violence of the state to show what they really are and end up protecting his comrades, or he was engaged in some sort of overtly violent act and just met his end that way. But I do think that there's something to be said about George's sacrifice as it's claimed by his comrades and in the book by Who Killed George Jackson, that what Two Black was talking about in terms of sacrificial violence, might fit, might work. I have to reread his Two Blacks work and then and maybe just ask him about that. So all right. Oh, I have a notification problem. He is live. There's no notification. Shadow ban behavior. Honestly, I don't know how all that works. And so double check that when you subscribe that you select all for notifications instead of, I think, just personalized or something else. But I really don't know how in when. And then I do also know that YouTube's algorithm somehow determines what segment of your actual subscribers they should alert. So even if you're subscribed, you may not get alerts. What are your top 5 books surrounding Malcolm X that you recommend? I'm gonna be trifling, in part because my memory's bad, but I'm gonna encourage you to go back to Black Liberation Media and check the series that we did last summer or last year. Because I ended up talking about a lot of them. You know what my favorite would probably one of them would be, and I don't even it's not even a book technically, just Muhammad Ahmed's dissertation on the Revolutionary Action Movement, his thesis, because I remember reading that for the series, and the relationship between Malcolm X and the Revolutionary Action Movement is under discussed. So that would make the list. Zach Kondo's Conspiracies. I'm still waiting on his the new edition. And I don't know. That's a good question, though. I'd have to think about that. I know it's not Manning Marable's book. I know it's not Peniel Joseph's book comparing Malcolm to Obama. Jesus Christ. I don't know. It's recency bias, but Kahindi Andrews' book, I have some disagreements with it. We might have to talk to Brother Kahindi about it, but I like what he does, and I like the method that he uses in assessing Malcolm, using Malcolm's speeches in ways that most of us or many who have written about Malcolm haven't done. But I have to think more about that. But that's a perfect segue because I do want to revisit this panel that I've ran into from March of 1993, which was I thought fascinating. Unfortunately, like 90% of the panel is no longer alive, but one person, we'll have some fun at least with one of the people who pops up in there. At least I will. This was great. We talked about this one. This was one of the ones we talked about. Yeah, so I'm gonna just go ahead and say that. Definitely check the 100th birthday series on Black Liberation Media. I do like our collection of essays, but a live reinvention. I actually do like the work there, but I don't know. I don't know if it would actually make my top 5. Because I would say I would mess around and say, even with the criticism that like the Pathfinder books and Brightman series, the socialist edits of Malcolm's speeches and collections, like if you were counting books, I'd like to have Malcolm's speeches just be the books. But I don't know. That's a good question. That's a good question. Wait, what am I missing here? I actually don't recommend the Haley by. Whoops.
Today,
I actually
Right.
don't. Whoops. I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. I actually don't recommend the autobiography, and I probably should. I mean, I don't know, but I actually, but it wouldn't be in my top 5. Bill Sales' book on the OAAU would be in my top 5. That would be in my top 5. You have all of my books. Yeah, that's not difficult. All 2.5. There are databases to read dissertations, and you can. It depends sometimes on which one you're looking for and which university and all of that, but you can get them. Like you can, uh, like you can get mine through the University of Maryland's portal. You can get, so you can, yeah. And I, um, from time to time, enjoy reading people's dissertations and whatnot. I'm enjoying the one I'm reading now, almost Dr. Erica Brown's World Changing. You know what? I don't think I've read this one. Malcolm X, Black Liberation, The Road to Workers' Power by Jack Barnes. I don't think I know that one. Yeah. Yeah, I miss me riding around with academics too, but that's when I had that 0-0 schedule in the Institute for Urban Research and a fully working vehicle. You know, uh, I don't think that vehicle could handle that workload right now. So, but I was on that that 0-0 teaching schedule. It was beautiful for a minute. It was beautiful. Um, and but oh man, I'm gonna tell that story too. What happened there was in those members patrons videos on the theft of my work and my struggled promotion. There's some discussion of this, I think. But what happened in the Institute for Urban Research, like a lot of it was coming back watching, the thing with Dr. Brown. Oh my God, man. Oh, and OO means I had no classes. I had no classes. At the time, if you were in the Institute for Urban Research, you did not have to teach any classes. I think they have to teach one now. Even that would be great. So for a hot minute, I was just researching. I will say the first edition of the Buying Power book came out of that for the most part. So I at least got something out of that time. But it was crazy. And now I don't, that's one of the reasons why I don't know how I struggle to see when I would be able to write again. Because I needed that much time. Like I needed that. And so like it's a huge difference. It's a huge difference. People teaching one class, maybe even 2 classes. It's so much easier to be productive in other ways. So but we back to the 4-4 auto right now. Shh. Shh. All right, so I didn't do it exactly right. But what I did was because I didn't catch the timestamps at necessarily the exact beginning of everybody's comment, but so I might have to do some rewinding a little bit here, but I think we can have a little bit of fun with this. I thought this discussion. I'm very sorry. I never saw it before, and it just brought back a lot of memories in terms of who's there and what's being said. Um, and it's a discussion shortly, like a few, I think, weeks or months after Spike Lee's Malcolm X film had been released. So it's a panel discussion about the film and about some of its reverberating impact. And this might take a little bit of time. We'll have to see. I'm not going to play the entire thing, but I don't know. This was a fun watch. This was a fun watch. So I'll put the link to the whole thing in the show description. I'm gonna just go to the parts that I sort of clipped here. Um and so so the first person you're gonna see here is Pam Dowell, who I had never heard of before, and she passed away in 2015. But at the time, in 1993, she was a film critic with, I think, PBS or NPR, and they're being asked in this sort of first round of questions what they think about the film and what did they think Spike did and didn't do. And here's at least part of her first. And okay, also on the panel you'll see, so Pam Dowell, you'll see the late Jackie Jones, you'll see the late Christopher Hitchens, you'll see the still living A. Peter Bailey, and this part gets I didn't you'll see Juan Williams, who I don't know if we'll play it, but he does his black conservative thing. And I will say that I saw him speak when I was in grad school, and he came up to Ithaca, New York, and he gave a lecture on his book, I think at the time, about Thurgood Marshall. And he talked about how Thurgood Marshall took all these shots at Malcolm X and was right to do so, and that he said some very disparaging things about Malcolm in that talk. And I challenged him during the Q&A session as an older grad student at the time. And then years later, I saw him walking down the street in DC when I was living in DC still. And I just saw him walking down the street, and I, you know, I said, he was walking by. He didn't know me. He recognized me from the Ithaca exchange. But I said, Juan, and he was like, I said, my guy, I just got to let you know that I said something like, I just got to let you know that I don't like what you do in these media spaces. I don't like your journalism. I don't like how you talk about Malcolm X. I don't like how you talk about race. And he listened to me. He stood there and he said, okay, smiled. He said, I hear you. You don't like what I do. And gave me the whole, I don't give a look, and kept it moving and kept walking. And I was like, and I always remember that, because I always remember that as that's how power deals with the powerless. And that's why I'm back to what Jonathan Jackson was saying. The time for disorganized rallies and whatever is over. The time for disorganized, personal, I don't like what you're doing, and I'm calling you out on the streets of DC is gone. Like, they don't care. They're not moved by that. He was like, all right. Oh man. So, okay, here we go. Let me just so I think this is when Pam is being asked about what her first thoughts of the film were, something like that.
Williams, you've written.
Oh wait a minute, I missed
acceptable.
that. I didn't want to hear see what happened. What happened to my timestamp? Hold up. Don't nobody want to hear Juan. He actually doesn't even really say anything. He at one point during the exchange, he says something kind of interesting, but
coming out.
Right, here we go.
Juan Williams, you've
okay. So I caught her at the end of her comments.
Obviously, for some people, it was a starting point.
Yeah, and that after
there's.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So here we go. This must have been where she was talking.
It was very clear, I thought, what he wanted to do.
That is Spike. She's talking about what Spike wanted to do.
And that he was often quoted when this film was about to be released as saying that young black kids should skip school one day and go see Malcolm X. He later sort of retracted that. It wasn't quite what he said anyway. But the reason that he felt that way was because when he was a child, he had been taken out of school to go see Gone with the Wind. And it was very clear that he was determined to right that wrong and to make a black epic that did the same kind of thing, that had the same sort of sweep and historical breadth and the same mythic proportions, I think, that Gone with the Wind had for kids like him who were forced to see it, or had for white kids, and he was forced to see it. He wanted to make sure that he could answer Gone with the Wind, I think. I think that's very clear.
Does it answer Gone with the Wind?
In its own way, it does. You know, it works better as myth than as history, and for all its, I say that it's a very conventional film, and I think it is. It's a very conventional biopic that mythologizes the man whose life it portrays. But it works rather well as myth, and within the confines of being very conventional, I think that it's a rather good teaching tool, an introductory course in Malcolm X, if you will, a kind of, one might almost say, a Malcolm X made easy, made accessible to a very large audience. And, you know, I mean, I'm disappointed that it's not a better film than it is, but I'm impressed that it's as good a film as it is.
Jackie Jones?
All right, so why I wanted to include that is because I thought when she refers to Spike Lee's comments about Gone with the Wind, that is again part of the confession that I was pointing to the other day when he was talking, he was in that discussion with Ryan Coogler. That in a way it comes up later in this conversation, but it definitely comes up when we're talking to Mtume and Samantha and you know, those discussions around third cinema and all that Spike absolutely, and because she actually makes a point elsewhere. I thought it was I don't know, I'm always rushing too much, but at one point in her comment she says that she wished he had done a better job of making a film using some of the film techniques that he used in other films like Do the Right Thing, which she was much more appreciative of, that she wanted to see him bring to this film here. But he was spending so much time trying to make a Gone with the Wind for Black people that he followed too much of what she was saying was the conventional approaches to film, which I thought was an important point. And to Mtume's point, as I understand it, that this is part of the problem with Spike and mainstream first cinema filmmakers. They're trying to make films even that are nominally about Black or other communities or other histories or struggles or politics that conform to a very first cinema construct, which makes it impossible to include or do the things that we would want it or needed to do, and always limit it to becoming part of a propaganda product for the state in suppressing radical and or you know, politics and rebranding radicalism for something that is workable for a mainstream, mostly affluent white audience. So, all right, moving on. Let's see if I got this part. Where did I catch Al Freeman? So the late Al Freeman, I think I mentioned, who played Elijah Muhammad and who had also played, I believe, Malcolm X in an earlier version. He is here and is asked and says something in one of his responses that I thought was interesting. But again, oh man, where did I? All right, let's see how I did here. And let's shut this down here, and then we'll pull this up here. And let's see.
Me listening to Juan and Peter talking.
Christopher Hitchens?
Yeah, they would be uncomfortable. Time there seemed to be in the minds of many young Black people, as you have said, that appropriated Malcolm for their own sort of cult mythic reasons, that made a climate for this film to be made at somehow having been made, and as it is, sort of diffused a bit of that, which is a very curious thing.
Which is not what Spike Lee would have expected to happen.
Yeah, neither would I. So this is just a thought that occurred to me listening to Juan and Peter.
So I don't know about that. So the reason I wanted him to be heard saying that is because Al was saying, as we discussed last year about this in the Malcolm X series, it was the Black youth returning to Malcolm. And I'm not sure if I'll have this in another part of the clips that I got, but there is some discussion on this panel of it being Black youth in hip hop that were returning a popularity and a sort of level of consciousness around Malcolm to Black youth that had to be responded to by the state's apparatus, the colonial apparatus, to suppress that. So when the host and moderator, the then dean of or chair of communications or dean of the school of communications at American University, interrupts to say that Spike wouldn't have wanted that, or speculates about Spike's politics, I don't know that where Spike is or is not on that. I am confident in saying that the colonial apparatus, the ruling elite, the owners, the investors, Warner Brothers, the studio, the Black bourgeoisie who would eventually kick in on the film, Bill Cosby and Oprah and all of them, they were responding and wanted to respond to this uprise in interest among Black youth around Malcolm X, who were, as they bring up on the panel later on, I think it's Jackie Jones who brings it up, I think, saying that it may have even been Hitchens. Anyway, somebody mentions the fact that Black youth were recognizing that the promises of the previous generation were not coming true, and were very, very frustrated. And as at least a semi-Black youth semi-Black and semi-youthful by the time of the film came out, I was already in my early 20s. That's damn right. That's exactly how I felt, and how I felt people around me felt. It wasn't clear. It wasn't well articulated necessarily. It wasn't properly politically educated and aligned, but there was absolutely, beginning from when I became somewhat of a somewhat conscious being in my early teens, in the early to mid 80s, and certainly by the end of the 80s and the early 90s, when we were already Yusuf Hawkins and Eleanor Bumpers and all these all of this has already happened. Like we were already gravitating to those symbols of Malcolm and the X hats and the shirts and it was just a vibe. The rap music of the day sampled Malcolm, sampled Farrakhan, sampled Khalid Muhammad, sampled Ivan Van Sertima, sampled these voices so you would hear them. So for Al Freeman to acknowledge that this is what was driving it, and that the film, he says, I don't really know. So it somehow suppressed that. Yeah. That was absolutely the design. I would argue. All right, so I'm just kind of still going in order here with what I pulled out, and this next part is. So later, we're going to get to this. So the problems of Christopher Hitchens show up. Oh, he does this. There's a part of here I got kind of heated watching this. We'll get to that. But here, I think he says something. I was like, this was why I remember at one point having to go through some confusion as to why when I saw Chris Hitchens starting to move more to the right, certainly around the Iraq War and all of that. And if I had seen the rest of this panel, I would have reached some more critical conclusions earlier about him. But at the time, I was still impressed by his intellect and some of the positions he took politically and some of his arguments, including this part here. But he undermines himself later. But here we go.
Call him up and say, how are things?
So he's talking about, and I mentioned this during the discussion with Two Black the other day. He's talking about. I can get it to the. Here we go.
I've got a friend in Jerusalem. He's an old resistance fighter from Europe called Israel Shahak, who now lives in Israel and defends the human and the national rights of the Palestinians. And whenever I call him up and say, how are things, he's prone to reply, well, Christopher, he says, there are encouraging signs of polarization. And the fact that he knows how to think that way, and most people don't, and are afraid of confrontation and of polarization, and indeed always use those words as if they were pejorative, whereas if you can claim to be a healer or a unifier, you're axiomatically privileged in American society, should make us wonder why it is that actually the consensus has somewhat managed to absorb this movie. It seems to me people underestimate all the time the fantastic equipment of shock absorption that this consensus has. Now, I would say the book drove me to read the autobiography again and to read James Baldwin's original script for the first time, and also to read another book that's very interesting, which is SpikeLee's own compilation of the book of the movie. Contains a lot of the original interviews he did. And I think I'd like to offer just some reasons why I think the consensus has absorbed it. Partly that's by the will of the critics and most people who write in this country, because when they can absorb, when they can say that something is healing or entertaining, they will. And partly I think it is Spike Lee's fault that it was so easily assimilable into the general wet blanket of cultural discussion in the United States. If you consider the autobiography, the movie interview book that's just called X, you can get in any bookstore paperback, and the Baldwin script, you'll find 4 important things I think that are missing. Or have been rendered blandly. Some critics point out there are some autobiographical details. I think my comrade on the right is quite correct in saying there's much too much show-off stuff of the early pimp days, the Malcolm Little days. Partly that's also to give Spike Lee a chance to show off in his zoot suit, let's not forget.
Which got an Oscar nomination.
Which won an Oscar nomination, yeah. Which is the bit that gets the Oscar, which I wasn't displeased to see. It was quite fun and so on. Then there are things where we, even those of us who admire him, can't be certain that the author of the autobiography was telling the truth about his father, and about the torching of his own house.
So I forgot about this part. He does this slick stuff here too. So why Hitchens are you now all of a sudden an expert on whether Malcolm was telling the truth about his father's killing or who burned his house in Detroit? And to suggest that he burnt his own house is trifling and disgusting. Again, considering his wife and 2 children, I think he had 2 daughters at the time, were asleep in the house. So to deny the man his version of events and to suggest that he would have been complicit in burning up his own house and telling a lie about his father's killing is really to speculate on the side of the state and to confess your own pre-existing bias. That said, I do like his previous point that, however he put it, that Spike created a version of Malcolm that could be so easily subsumed underneath the wet blanket, as he put it, of general consensus and normality. So that part is why I initially wanted to include reference to that acknowledgement of Spike's complicitness in creating a version of Malcolm that would be accessible. That's why Warner gave him the money. And that's why Warner said at the time that they wanted to make Malcolm X a brand as they had done for Batman and The Simpsons. So yeah, and that's why to suggest that Spike would not have, as the moderator did a moment ago, that Spike would have been bothered at the film being used to suppress the radical, militancy of Black youth is kind of silly too. But I also, by the way, like that point that Hitchens made about Israel Shahak. That And it was funny because I when I did that video about Shahak in this what I've wanted to be this ongoing series about we don't have an analysis of Jews. Some of the backlash I got in social media included, somewhat predictably, that a reference to Israel Shahak was my confession that I was. This was written by someone, a pro-Zionist, and was saying that it was my confession that I'm anti-Jewish and anti-Zion. I don't think they said anti-Zion. I think they said anti-Jewish, because Israel Shahak to Zionists was considered a self-hating Jew for his criticism of Zionism. But I like that point that Shahak was making through Hitchens' memory about polarization being a good thing. That, especially in the context of ignomality, or or the ignoble colonial context, we should want there to be some polarization created, some confrontation created. Going back to Two Black's point, it should be good to see it. If we don't see polarization, then it would suggest that everybody's just in agreement with this madness. But people who don't think dialectically, perhaps, or however Hitchens was conceiving it, can't see it that way. Now, Hitchens, of course, just couldn't get past his own, white bias, or whatever you want to call it. But, and it comes back even worse later. But let's see how close I got to this part here, because this is going back to my previous point beautifully, that is how GeorgeJackson was beautifully calling out Andrew Young. We get some more of that here through my homeboy, well, he's not really my homeboy, but A. Peter Bailey, who did contribute to our Alive reinvention in criticism of Marable's Malcolm X.
Neither of them was a lot much.
And I bring it back to what I was saying earlier, that it is no way that you can tell me that the so-called black conservatives agreed that the United States should be taken before the United Nations Commission for violating the human rights of black people. I wonder if they believe in self-defense. I wonder if they believe in black power. These were all things. You cannot believe in black power and get put on the Supreme Court, and get made vice president of IBM. If they were really, if they were carrying out these beliefs, this man was about the empowerment, not integration, not separation, not desegregation. He was about power. And the people who claim that they support him are not doing anything about that. In fact, we say that the basic argument between the Clarence Thomases, the Shelby Steeles, and the Thomas Sowells, and the Jesse Jacksons, the Andy Youngs, and the Benjamin Hookes is over which group of white folks do you attach yourself to. The liberals are the conservatives, the Democrats are the Republicans. Neither of those factions is talking about empowering the black community, and that is what Malcolm X was about. You cannot say that you believe in or support or identify with the philosophy of Malcolm X if that is not your focus of your conversation and your action.
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
That's my biggest pet peeve with so many of these folks who talk about Malcolm and Martin and write about Malcolm and Martin that we criticize around here all the time. They don't really agree with their politics. You don't. And Bailey brings this up repeatedly in this panel. Like, black conservatives, black folks, mainstream included, don't want Malcolm's politics. They don't really want that. And the people, but the Andy Youngs and them, they really don't want that. They just want to parade and dress themselves in those movements and take credit and rebrand those movements. All right, so here I did have it clipped where Jackie Jones talks about, and unfortunately she passed away, I think in 2005, I think. But yeah. But she makes this. She comes back to this point about the youth and Malcolm.
I want to come to you, Al Freeman, on this issue of the things
living in
The Jesse Jackson, the
I was
Democrats,
clearly catching it at the end
really
of their
isn't people
comments.
that know.
the Democrats, and your action.
And I'd just like to add to that, and I think that you have to keep in mind also that the audience for this film generally really isn't people that knew Malcolm X as Peter did, or people that have a real grasp of the historical moment. And part of, I think, what the support for Malcolm, where that's come from, is
Message.
thing is played out, that it hasn't helped the majority of African American youth that, live in inner cities, or even middle-class black kids that now see like a resurgence of racism and are resegregating themselves. I think when you look at, what's come out of rap music, which basically is where how the film was made, is that you see exactly what Peter's talking about, that I think a lot of black youth have just completely given up on black leadership, and that reaching back to Malcolm X is the strongest, most effective model that they see for self-determination.
Absolutely, and that's why that film had to get made as a suppressive response to what she was just describing was happening. And you can't just have black people, young black people who are coming up in struggle or some new form of struggle, picking up Malcolm in his authentic way, that his authentic self, without the rebrand. So this is, we're back to Al Freeman and talking about the film that got made.
Any off dinner that there were some, actually, that was
Out of rap music that's come from is
actually, that was what went through my mind the first time around. I mean, I read all those scripts that were developed, the Calder Willingham script, the James Baldwin treatment, the James Baldwin script, and none of them were speaking to the kind of Malcolm that I wanted to see on the screen. But of course, Warner Brothers at that time did not want to even get into that. So later on, here we are, and it's going round, and I believe a lot of people were expecting to see all those kinds of omissions, that kind of confrontation, and some answers to some very deep questions about who and what and why was Malcolm assassinated. And I don't think that, I believe it was deliberately left out by Spike because he wanted to, he hinted at it very broadly, I think. He didn't name anybody specific, but it was pretty clear that there were some establishment kind of forces that were at work there. And of course, we all know that Malcolm was not admitted into France after he left Mecca. For what reason? He wasn't admitted in. The Brits wouldn't let him in either. For what reason? And that his organization was going to have a global kind of constituency. That was enough to alarm a lot of people.
Well, the assumption there is that the United States asked France and Britain not to let Malcolm X in.
Well, we've heard that, and that's quite possible. I don't know, but it was clear that it was some Western influence, certainly, because the Cold War was still on, and Mr. Hitchens is absolutely right that Malcolm did have some leftist connections there. And of course, Nasser was assassinated, so was Tambo, so was Cabral. All those people who were assassinated, and Malcolm, we were all assassinated at the same time. I mean, it's a Cold War thing, clearly. And but I don't think, at the kickoff dinner that Spike gave, Peter was there, and there were a lot of people giving advice to Spike about how he.
So this part right here, what he says here about this dinner gets people riled up and causes some back and forth. I don't know how much we're going to actually get to engage in this review relative, but it's very telling. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we should just,
we should make
requested advice.
Yeah. Right. It was. One was Benjamin 2X, who said quite openly that if there were any explicit sex scenes of Malcolm, that the film was going to have a lot of trouble. He said, "Remember Salman Rushdie?" Yes. Well, you see, I think that was something Spike heard quite clearly that night, and certain scenes got altered.
A fatwa put on them
as a result of that.
That's an extraordinary statement that a director would labor under that kind of pressure. This is not an ordinary film in that case. This is not the usual process. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of people who put pressure on the people who are making films, but
Are you saying then that a director in this country could make a film and, let's say, for instance, show Thomas Jefferson in bed with Sally Hemings? Or Robert E. Lee, cavorting with one of his, his slave women? I mean, let's be real. This is a real world that we live in.
Probably wouldn't be threatened with death.
Oh, I think they could.
And
He'd be threatened with economic ruin instead of actual assassination if he were to do that. And in fact, people certainly have written about Thomas Jefferson
there's a
in
difference
that light as well.
There's a vast difference in writing about something and putting it on screen.
Well,
So you could see here. So this actually, now that I'm watching this again and again, this is actually prefiguring some hostilities that come up later. And what is clear is that there's just, again, this persistent lack of understanding among significant segments of non-Black societies of what Black communities actually struggle with and what the conditions actually require and what national liberation actually involves. So whenever people bring up these uncomfortable issues of don't you dare misrepresent us in this context or there will be consequences, it's met with this kind of response. Oh no, well, if someone wrote something salacious about Thomas Jefferson, they might suffer something economically or their film might not do as well, but they wouldn't certainly be threatened with assassination. The contexts are entirely different. First of all, and we don't know that that's true. And we don't know to what extent physical threats have not been involved in the method. But again, the power dynamic is entirely backwards. So no one might have to make a threat in that way because you have the Pentagon writing scripts, you have a wealthy white elite determining what films get funded and greenlit and put in screens. So you have an already existing colonial apparatus that protects against such necessities. But if you are among an oppressed, colonized community struggling for national liberation in the context of this kind of media environment designed to suppress those efforts, then maybe other kinds of conversations are necessary or need to occur. And then because they're now being asked to comment on what was at least depicted as a mostly Black gathering of Black people to talk about what is ostensibly a Black film, although it's really not. The idea would then be that whatever those discussions contain should be given the legitimacy that they deserve. But there's obviously this no.
A vast difference in the audience that you're going to reach. I think that I was there that evening when that statement was made. And
how did you react to that, Peter, to that statement?
Well, I was a little bit apprehensive about the Salman Rushdie reference, but if anything that kept that movie from being sleazy, or what I considered, I think that I might be considered a prude. I think that American movies have become, some of the absolute sleaziest things on the face of the earth. This is all of them, mainly television, the whole works. So to do that with Malcolm X would, in my opinion, have been something that Spike, if he took that advice, he was an extremely wise person.
So the only thing I disagree with he says there is that it's not, the issue isn't, I don't think the issue is are we prudes and not wanting to see Malcolm in some sex scene? But the issue is, if we're only going to get a couple of hours of Malcolm X on a screen, let's focus on what's more appropriate. And some of the discussion does get to that. And even honestly, Hitchens brings up some important points about what was left out. And then there's a story that Peter Bailey tells of Carlos Moore and his crew being part of the international contingent, the Paris chapter of the OAAU, being there waiting to greet Malcolm when he was denied entrance into the country, and then rushing off to call London to say that we just saw Malcolm being put back on a plane to be sent back there. and that an inclusion of that, a scene like that, would have been not only great cinematically, but would have done a lot to show the internationalization of Malcolm's politics and the OAAU, which it gets almost no mention in the film, and no real discussion by so-called scholars of Malcolm posthumously since. So yeah, but the issue isn't the prude and we, myself included, who don't want to see nudity anymore of any kind, whatever. But that's not why. That's not the problem. The nudity and the sex. The issue is, why are we getting this about Malcolm X when none of that is relevant and none of the actual politics of Malcolm X show up in the film? Okay, so. All right, here I'm going to move it ahead a little bit to where Bailey and Hitchens get into it around Dr. King a little bit.
The people, probably the King people, eyes person.
Could I just? Sure. I just want to ask you a clarifying question. I think I know what you mean about Jefferson and Sally and so on, but I think, would you say it was the same thing, that you would have a very hard time getting a film dramatization of J. Edgar Hoover's tapes of Martin Luther King in the motel onto TV now either? And if oh, I'm sorry,
Christopher, it's very hard to read.
If I'm not audible, I was just taking may I call you Peter?
You probably would. I mean, people would get very upset.
Maybe I should have the
whether
question.
or not they would be able to stop it. I don't know.
I thought that was funny. It's because it sounds like, see, Bailey missed the question, I think, and it sounds like when Hitchens says, "May I call you Peter?" and then Peter says, "You probably would," it sounds like he's saying, probably accurately, like, you would in your, in your white condescension probably would call me Peter. But he's not. He's saying, he's responding to the question, would you see a film made of J. Edgar Hoover in a dress, or of J. Edgar Hoover's tapes of Dr. King, which were obviously very salacious and included some I mean, it was some of what's depicted in I think Taylor Branch's books and stuff like that. It's pretty wild. But okay, that's what.
I don't know, but I do know that people, probably the King people, and I'm assuming this because they gave up so much to get that holiday that I'm not quite sure what else they're prepared to give up to get a movie.
Message.
Have a dream, Martin Luther King. I mean, they gave up a tremendous amount on him to get the holiday. So I'm not sure what else they would give up in order to get a movie done.
I mean, the other night on PBS there was, in effect, footage of J. Edgar Hoover in a dress as a transvestite hooker in the Plaza Hotel.
Well, there was
which
not,
is actually,
in fact.
There
were hints of
There was
this.
more than hint. There was testimony from living witnesses. I thought it was the perfect revenge for Hoover's prurient taping of other people. I thought it was, as is Anthony Summers' book.
And I bet you that will end up in a movie.
Which is,
I think we'll see J. Edgar Hoover in a dress.
I think we will see J. Edgar Hoover in a little nice black little number strutting up.
So they're both wrong, right? There's been no such film. In fact, all we've gotten are the closest we've gotten, I think, is Liam Neeson playing Deep Throat, right? And making the FBI look good as an entity. All we've gotten is J. Edgar Hoover being blamed in Judas and the Black Messiah as being the sole problem in the FBI, but the FBI, through Jesse Plimpton's whatever that his character, the FBI is made to look good. So we haven't seen anything akin to the distortion of Malcolm and Martin and others. Sort of revenge, as Hitchens has suggested, in terms of a filmic depiction of J. Edgar Hoover. If anything, he's at worst depicted as the sole boogeyman, while the rest of the institution is great. And so they definitely missed that one for sure. Yeah,
up and down. It will happen. And the reason I'm saying this is I do think actually all these things are not only possible, but probably necessary.
Well, I don't think you can, to me, you can't compare. See, J. Edgar Hoover has been exposed. When you're talking about Malcolm X, to me, as a black person, then with a white person, you're talking about Thomas Jefferson's. You don't compare Malcolm X with J. Edgar Hoover.
All right, fair enough.
And if you're going to compare him, you compare him with the Thomas Jeffersons and the George Washingtons and the Robert E. Lees, and those kind of people.
Yeah, I didn't understand.
And how they are treated, the lies that have been told about them in movies and books
to
and
glamorize them,
shows and everything for centuries. These lies have been told. I feel lucky in having gotten to know Brother Malcolm, is that I personally don't have to look upon him, as a myth, as a god. I can see him as a great black man, not a great man, as a great black man. And so that's what I am looking for. I can see his flaws. I can say that he should not have said the chicken's coming home to roost. Not because it was not true, because it was very accurate, but for political reasons, it provided his enemies with ammunition against him. That's the only reason he should not have said it. The statement itself was very accurate.
I want to change this.
So I don't think I'm going to get to it, but there's a part where Hitchens comes back at one point to say that Bailey in terms of being critical of what Malcolm should or should not have said, that he is it, wait a minute, is it in here? No, I don't think it's in here, but I don't think I have that part clipped, but or I didn't. But the point was that Hitchens was saying that there's a scene in he's trying to be critical of Spike and how he, and rightfully so in this case, depicts Malcolm, and there's Hitchens brings up the scene where the white girl comes up to Malcolm and says, "What can we do who want to be supportive?" And Malcolm says nothing and walks away. And Bailey disagrees with Hitchens on this, but Hitchens was saying, but what actually happened, and if you go back and read the autobiography, and Malcolm says he wishes he could have said to her something else, that he regretted having said that to her in that way, and that he wanted to have said something more about encouraging whites to engage the international struggle, or blah blah, or something like that. And but you know what? I think I do have that in there. My bad. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Because Hitchens says that Spike he used that scene to send racial thrills through the audience, and he was right about that. That he reduces Malcolm in that moment so he can send out something sensational for the audience to chew on, but never really gets to the actual meaningful, nuanced politics of Malcolm. So. But so we'll see. Maybe we'll come back to that. But this is back to Jackie Jones.
Racist rhetoric, and
after they played
from the theaters. Why didn't it get more nominations, Jackie?
Well, I think one thing is,
it's asking. So he was saying that the film only got, I think, 2 nominations, and because they were talking about going back to sort of what Dowell was saying earlier about Spike, and Spike saying he wanted to create a Gone with the Wind, so a Black Gone with the Wind type of sweeping dramatic film, but it didn't do as well. It didn't get as many nominations, didn't get any victories, and they're trying to assess why that is. So
I think people were disappointed in it, both black and white. I think people expected to be made more angry by the film. Mm-hmm. I think they expected it to be a more angry kind of a film, and I think what Spike tried to do was kind of humanize the anger that had been marketed before. So I think that
is, again, humanize the anger, she says. But this has been my problem with Spike. This has been my problem with the way Ryan Coogler and his films have been talked about. This, he humanizes Oscar Grant. He humanizes Malcolm X. He humanizes well, the black community. But that's a descriptor of how whites see black people. So it's an admission to me when I hear that it's them saying the story, the framing, the interpretation has been reset to appeal to white audiences. And that's why, I think she's saying here, the film that many would have expected to see about the anger and the hostility and the militancy isn't there, because once you adjust it to appease white affluent audiences, you're not going to make them upset. You're not trying to scare them. And yet, as I'm gonna, we're gonna come back to, he just didn't do it well enough.
Before the film opened, there was this idea that white people would be up in arms about it because there would be all this racist rhetoric, and black people would be moved to, take to the streets, and that's not what the film was. And I think that once that got out, and once, as Christopher Hitchens was saying, that once all the critics said, oh, this is a wonderful movie, and, that it kind of took the sting off of it, really.
I may say that I saw a very agreeable thing. I went with Walter.
So now, kind of continuing with that theme, I think it may be just coming up right here in Hitchens' next statement, but Hitchens says something that I thought was interesting along the lines of what Jones was just saying.
That night might end in some kind of
the anger, once, as Christopher Hitchens was saying, that once all the critics said, oh, this is a wonderful movie, and, that it kind of took the sting off of it, really.
I may say that I saw a very agreeable thing. I went with Walter Mosley to see it in New York, the showing, and I saw something.
By the way, that is exactly what happened with Oscar Grant in the Fruitvale Station movie that started Ryan Coogler's career. As I again, correctly predicted would happen. He would be rewarded. That is, Coogler would be rewarded for that film, because all of the initial reviews from the white, publications were, oh, what a wonderful film. He humanized Oscar Grant. He told the story, I'll put a link to in the show description, but to the review, but it's so wild. They all said the same thing. He could have told the story of a police killing of a black man on New Year's Eve in a way that would have scared us and angered us and enraged racial division, but he didn't. He humanized Oscar Grant. It's the same. There is no wonder again why Coogler would be praising today and emulating Spike Lee, because Spike showed him the blueprint.
I'd like to see more often real fear on the faces of Warner Brothers executives and publicity people who were sort of guarding the entrance to the cinema. They really thought that night might end in some kind of
This
riot.
was the night of the opening.
Yeah, and it was amazing to see, and I realized how much I like to see publicity people look frightened, and I don't see it enough. And then I realized that, in fact, of course, that it was all in their minds. It must be some kind of guilt complex, I suppose. They don't think...
No, they knew who Malcolm was, and they knew what Malcolm represented to white people. That's why Wendy Wolf, the editor of Manning Marable's A Life of Reinvention, our criticism was a lie of reinvention. But Wendy Wolf was saying, I was afraid of Malcolm. I'm a white liberal. I'm afraid of Malcolm. They needed someone, Marable in that case, or what we're told, Marable in that case, Spike in this case, Coogler in other cases, to tell the story of all this black suffering and pain and militancy in a way that doesn't scare them. So so he's right. I agree with Hitchens again in this part. It would be great if PR reps were terrified. They should be terrified if the film was doing what they thought it was going to do, but it didn't. And that's why Dhoruba and Amiri Baraka and John Henrik Clark, who just a few months before this would have taken place, had their panel that I'm still trying to get Alombe Brath Jr. to Cinque, not Alombe Jr., but Cinque Brath, please give me the audio. I lost the tape that I had years ago. But that's why they were saying, condemning the film, that if you, I think Dhoruba put it, or was it Baraka? One of them said, if you see a real film about Malcolm, you're supposed to leave the theater trying to tear something up. But that's not the feeling walking out the theater. And that's why nobody needed to be afraid.
I think the subject can come up without the threat of violence. That is a compliment of a kind to the subject. But the fact is, you wouldn't know from seeing the movie why that really potent factor in the thing exists.
But the threat of violence that Hitchens mentions is not coming from the film. The threat of violence is coming from the conditions imposed on Black communities that Black youth at that time were responding to by putting on X and revisiting X that this movie had to negate and undermine.
I want to challenge Peter Williams on something.
And then he calls him Peter Williams, and has to correct himself. He doesn't even know who he's talking to. And again, I'm seeing it more clearly now. Precipitates what comes up.
Unless I'm usurping or someone else's time.
No, I just wanted to hear Peter on this point, and then
Bailey.
Well, see, I think that it shows, number one, as we like to say, that those Black people who come from my perspective, that trying to be acceptable has its limitations. Not only in making movies, but in other areas. That's why we don't spend a lot of time trying to be acceptable, because it has its limitations. I think number two, despite the fact of, maybe someone like myself feel about the movie, there are some powerful scenes in that movie. There are some powerful scenes that the average white American, and this is where I disagree about the idea that the average white American has not fallen for this new Malcolm X that they're trying to image. They know what Brother Malcolm was saying. They have not gone for a moment for this, this new Malcolm X that everybody, that the intellectuals and the critics are talking about. They know better. And so even when they see, like scenes like that I love to talk to the young people about, the dictionary scene where he looked at the definitions of black and white. That was a powerful scene for an American movie. You don't see too many things in an American movie like that. The scene with Bailey.
You should describe that scene a little more.
So that's it. I don't agree with this point, but
actually.
But Bailey says that some of these scenes have a powerful impact, and if the film reverberates and ends up getting picked up, as we've seen a little bit over the years, getting syndicated on Saturday afternoons or whatever and played randomly, that Black kids would have an opportunity to see some of these popular scenes and be moved and motivated into a higher stage of consciousness, seeing how Black is depicted and white is defined and all this, and a couple of other scenes. But I don't agree with that, actually. I think that overall, if after suffering the totality of that film, an individual good scene here or there, or a good point made here or there, is not going to overcome or even, I think, put a dent in the overall frame that's imposed. So if anything, it will again undermine what should be a radical moment by having that radicalism dissipated throughout the rest of the liberal and falsely representative versions of Malcolm, or the versions of Malcolm, or the reality of Malcolm that is entirely cut off in the film. That is the internationalism, the armed struggle, the OAAU, for instance, the people he met with in Africa. Like, we don't get that in the film. So yeah, a few good scenes here or there. I don't think get there, but I wanted to. There was more from Bailey that I wanted to get to. So
powerful scenes in that movie.
Yeah,
there's some power in me, and I think that if Spike had focused on that more, had talked about the international thing, when Brother Malcolm was invited to the OAU conference to speak, right. This was a major thing. No other Black American until that time had been invited to participate. Not to participate, but to attend, and it was allowed to distribute an information. And according to him, they passed a resolution condemning the treatment of Black people in this country by the United States. So if he had put more of those kinds of things, and to me, they are dramatic. When he got off that plane in Paris, I talked to a brother who was there, waiting for him in the airport. named Carlos Moore. And Carlos say that they were waiting for him inside the terminal, and they heard a French journalist come in and say that he was not going to be allowed in. So they ran out of and they looked down and they saw them take him off the plane, put him take him to the other end of the airport and put him on a plane going back to London. So they then ran into to the terminal and called London and told London that he was on his way back. Now this was the Organization of Afro-American Unity in Paris. He was going to be speaking before the Organization of Afro-American Unity in Paris. These were basically black people from this country, from Africa, and from the Caribbean who had formed this group in Paris. And to me, that's dramatic, and it would have made a great scene in a movie. And to not put it in was puzzling to me, because once again, by not doing this, I believe, it quieted down or negated the role that the United States government and the vital interest they had in seeing Malcolm X no longer around.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, that would have been a great scene, but you can't have that scene in there.
Aspect of it. And I think young people I think that a lot of people want to kind of slight, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but kind of want to slight Spike about not putting this in and not putting that in. And I think a lot of that is why the movie didn't get made before now. And I also think that there's some, and I wonder kind of how you feel about this, I think that there's some value to how conventional the film is. And like you say, the scene about the black and the white, and some of the speeches where Malcolm X is really talking about self-image and what you see when you look in the mirror and those kinds of things, which really, have never been said before in an American movie.
Yeah.
And this movie also, to me, has the potential of being like on television on Saturdays in 10 years, so that young people that are growing up will see that, and they'll see those scenes with the dictionary, and they'll see someone really challenging our own assumptions about who we are as African Americans. And I think that, the myth aspect of it, I think is important. And I was wondering how you felt about I didn't know Malcolm X, so
I can't agree with that point, because again, the fact that it would be played on Saturdays is part of why it's an ineffective film for our purposes. So again, a few good scenes here or there is not going to challenge the overall damaging impact of the film itself. But I do want to get to a couple more parts, and then of course to the big fight that does emerge. Well, relatively
serve
speaking,
any good purpose. It serves the oppressed in our society. We're disappointed. I think a lot of point out the oppressive tactics of American society, and therefore people were going to be outraged. People were going to be threatened that the doors to the cinema needed to be guarded. That was the power of the movie. And I don't think in that kind of
propaganda,
current political discourse, it didn't accomplish that end at all.
So then people were disappointed, you mean?
Well, I think people were disappointed who wanted the film as a vehicle for that kind of discussion. I think that's why Peter might be disappointed. I'm disappointed when I hear Peter say that he approves of someone sitting at a dinner table with an artist and saying that he might be scorned or somehow treated like Salman Rushdie or assassin or something.
So this is Juan getting his black conservative bona fides up and auditioning for his future on Fox News and all this other kind of stuff. And for the nonsense that he ran when he showed up in Ithaca when I was there a few years after this. 7 years after this. So yeah, but you can see, I just want to, why would he have to, that's why I put this part in, why would you have to bring the conversation all the way back to that point? If not to highlight that you want to be juxtaposed to the other black man on the panel. You don't want to be seen. And it's further shameful that Juan hails also from Panama. Boo!
For something he might do in the course of his art. I don't think there's any excuse for that kind of thing. I think it downplays the idea that art could be repressed or oppressed in our society.
And let's, by the way, remember why there is a C-SPAN. As Brian Lamb, the founder of it, said himself, in his discussion with Kwame Ture. The only reason there is a C-SPAN at all, that there ever was a C-SPAN, is because Brian Lamb saw Kwame Ture speak and then went home that night and saw the way it was misrepresented on the news and said that we need a channel dedicated to allowing people to be heard and speak in full. And so he said, that is Brian Lamb, the only reason there's a C-SPAN is because of Kwame Ture. So to the extent that C-SPAN has ever done anything good, we contribute that to Ture also.
Society, and then you might make excuses and say, well, I want the art to do this or do that, which is the myth-making function that this film has to fulfill for Malcolm X. But to my mind, that's corrupt, and it doesn't serve any good purpose. It serves the purpose of saying to people, this film is really hagiography. It has nothing to do with reality. It has everything to do with what's...
I hate that too. Oh my God, because you don't have problems when the hagiography is pointing to your heroes in all these films about whomever and all these histories that are dominant, prevalent as narratives, but now if we say something, we want Malcolm's accurate militancy represented. Now it becomes a hagiography, and and just as they would say, almost 20 years later about Marable's book, you're only critical of what Marable did because you can't handle something that's not a hagiography and is just praising the perfect godlike Malcolm. That's what Bill Fletcher and them said to us. And it was like, no, you just you can't handle the accurate critique demonstrating the rebranding of Malcolm and radical politics is something that we shouldn't aspire to. But so again, it's funny to revisit some of these videos and see it's like tracing some of the history of the nonsensical arguments that we would face a decade, 20, and even 30 years later.
What some people want to say to white American society in 1993, as opposed to a true artistic document about a tremendous life.
Well, see,
oh my God, by the way, in March of 93, I was still in the Navy. God damn. I was on my countdown. I was a short timer. I was talking trash about how I can't wait to get up out of this joint and join the revolution.
we probably could never agree, Juan, because I don't believe, I think that art is propaganda. I think that art is propaganda. When I go to see a movie as a child, and I saw those Tarzan movies, and I'm sitting there cheering Tarzan and Cheetah as they wiped out a whole group of African warriors.
Oh, absolutely. And if you, absolutely, Manny, Bill Fletcher, oh, I'm sorry, I missed zero PE. Bill Fletcher absolutely said that. He said it, you could check my channel later today if you want. I got the video up there now. I got the audio. Well, the video of the audio from when he said it to Baraka. But he said it to me. He said it elsewhere as well. He said, you just can't stand an honest assessment of Malcolm. You can't withstand an accurate critique of the potential shortcomings of Malcolm here and there. That's why you can't handle that. He would have. Oh man, it was so bad. It was so bad. But yes, he absolutely said it repeatedly.
Some people, that's art. To me, that was propaganda. And I know that people making decisions about that, and those decisions are made today about what is. There's certain things about Jewish people in this country you're not going to put in a movie. I don't care how artistic you are, because of the power they have to stop it. And other groups. And so I don't get upset by artists not being able to do everything they want, because no artist can do everything that he or she wants in this society.
So when I was watching this the first time and I heard him say that, I said, uh-oh. And at first I thought, oh, okay, all right, they didn't nothing. But uh-oh was right. And you all heard the uh-oh part.
We have less boundaries than anyone else.
So what are you going to do then? You're going to hold a gun to the head of every artist, and especially every black artist and black writer in America, and say, you must be politically correct, or you don't serve the cause. I think that's crazy.
I don't say anything to them. I don't let, to me, I'm only...
No, what you said was, you said something's going on with Jewish Americans. You got so much Jewish... I want to know what it is that we don't see about Jewish Americans.
Okay.
I saw a movie the other day on TV about white guys having sex with black women and misogyny in this country.
Juan, I'm only interested...
I don't see the point here,
Let me tell you about something about myself so that we'll be very clear on this.
And this is why I say in 2026 that series I started last year that needs to continue. We do not have an analysis of Jews. This conversation that happened in 1993 could happen and does happen exactly the same way in 2026. And I maybe should retitle it, We're Not Allowed to Have an Analysis of Jews. What is done in this exchange is so pathetic. And in light of Kanye's recent apology, in light of Kanye's apology, if the fact that this exact exchange happens in 2026 is already happening in 2026 still, again, I'm not making the argument because I think black people owe Jews anything. I'm not saying this because I accept the definition of Jews that I know is hotly debated, including in what's my man's name? Shlomo Sand's book, The Invention of Jewish People. But I am saying it for black people in black spaces, in black politicized spaces, or in any space that people want to have an honest conversation about comparing communities and how various communities got. Much more work has to be done. The analysis we're working with and how we frame it and approach it and how we're forced to frame and approach it is entirely, it's entirely upside down and backwards.
I have reached a state in my life that I am not interested in journalists, writers, artists, farmers, lawyers, doctors, who describe themselves as, I am not a black artist, I am an artist who happens to be black. I will not criticize those people because as far as I'm concerned, I believe in letting any black person be whatever they want to be. I personally am interested in black artists. That's all I'm interested in. I will not argue with the artist. In fact, I told someone that once who said to me, I'm an artist who happens, I was doing an article on actors and told me that they were an actor who happens to be black. And so I told him, I said, fine, then I will not interview you. Because when I get an assignment to do an article on actors who happen to be black, I'll give you a ring. I'm interested in black actors.
Now listen, that's called my...
You will not find me, that statement that you're talking about, I would never make it because I did not expect, unlike what you just said, I did not expect, Juan, this movie to be the movie on Malcolm X that I would want to make. You would be an idiot to think that Warner Brothers is going to put up $30 million to do the kind of movie on Malcolm X that would do the things that I believe and that would show the Malcolm X that I feel as though I knew. I just never expected that. I don't expect a black journalist on the Washington Post, to be able to do the kind of articles that
He's talking to Juan right there. That's why he pointed at him, just so you're clear. Yeah.
I think need to be done. If he gets one in every now and then, I give him credit. But I do not criticize him because, he can't do those kind of articles. I don't expect the Washington Post to be an instrument for black liberation. And I didn't expect this Warner Brothers movie to be. I feel as though Spike should be given credit. I think he got as much as he could, considering the circumstances. But I do criticize...
That part I don't agree with. He shouldn't be given credit for anything. He shouldn't have made the movie. The movie should not have been made. The movie should not exist. The movie does not help at all. It's a net negative in advancing a black collective radical consciousness. But
some things that I think that he might have gotten into the movie that were not there.
Okay, a couple. Go ahead, Juan.
All right, so I love that part. I want to include. I definitely wanted to make sure that I included Jackie Jones's response to this. So I want to bring it back to where she gets back into that conversation.
Juan said, because I think when you look at a Hollywood film that, I mean, I don't think that anybody should be threatened with their life about having nudity in their films, but I mean, Spike Lee's already been told a number of things that he can and cannot do. And I think it's kind of dangerous to talk about Hollywood as art anyway. You know, I mean, this is not like I'm at home painting, you know, a watercolor. I mean, these are very political decisions that are economically and politically mandated. And I think for somebody to threaten you with your life is one thing, but Warner Brothers was threatening with no money. I mean, I don't think that it's an issue of being politically correct. It's an issue of creating something.
So it gets washed away. But that line right there was more than anything why I wanted to include her comment in response. It reminds me again of what Two Black is saying about the context of violence, the definition of violence, et cetera, and so forth. And it even reminds me of the work that I'm kind of doing a little bit now too around structural violence and the narrative of Black capitalism, where in reference to Gao Tung's work, I remember trying to point out that when a person punches someone in the face, that is given so much attention because that disturbs the tranquil waters of the structurally violent society that produced the conditions where that person might want to swing on somebody, more or less is what. So the you know, Juan Williams as a conservative, of course, would want to do this, and white liberals would want to support him in this, in trying to sensationalize this point and rebrand the point that Bailey was making, and turning it into a negative by saying what should be said. The violence we are suffering requires certain forms of response. If you produce in an acclaimed response something that adds and aids the continuation of that structural violence, you deserve to be criticized. To turn the focus of violence to the criticism of Spike and not the violence of the state and the conditions Black people suffer, the violence of the assassination of Malcolm in particular, or as Jones pointed out there, the violence of Warner Brothers saying, we won't fund your movie unless you write it the way we want it, is again diabolical. I know Juan has never had as a goal the elevated consciousness of a Black community, but when he is presented and has historically accepted the presentation as a Black representative in media spaces and conversations like this, why he's there in the first place, why he's hired by the Post and eventually Fox and all these others in the first place to be the balancing Black voice against the Black community. When he says what he says, when he does that, he's aiding in the violence that Black people are suffering and then are being blamed for daring to say to somebody, don't you dare create a popular representation of our hero that works in service of the people creating these conditions. And then if someone dares to say something hostile in response to that, they get condemned. So I know it just was a passing moment that she's making here, but I wanted to help let it echo a little bit in 2026. The violence to be considered is not somebody telling Spike, don't you dare mess up Malcolm. The violence is in Warner and in Oprah and Cosby saying, we're only going to fund the version of Malcolm we want. And the version that ultimately is, as I'm saying, is a net negative in working to suppress the Black militancy that Malcolm was trying to evolve and was as great an exemplar of as we've ever produced.
In a capital-intensive marketplace. You know?
Well, that's what we're talking about. And it's contradictory, though, what you're saying to what Peter's saying, because you're saying that the economics of it would dictate the kind of film that would be made. And yet, at the same time, Peter's saying, well, he didn't expect anything out of the film because Warner Brothers was willing to put up the $30 million. And eventually, I think it rose to $40 million, money from other sources that
but I'm saying
that were back in the film. So you see, I mean, there's a contradiction in terms of what's being said here, but it all...
There's not a contradiction. Juan is just, he's creating a false contradiction. What Bailey is saying is, I don't expect anything from Warner, but that doesn't mean that I want to support members of my community participating in the Warner Brothers nonsense. It doesn't mean just because we know Warner is going to, it's just, again, I hear it is the same when I'm criticizing Peniel Joseph and whoever else for producing these anti-histories about radical people. I'm not doing it because I expect the structure to produce better. I'm doing it, if anything, to call out members of the community participating in the process. So it's not a contradiction to say I don't expect something to come from Warner Brothers, but I'm also going to be critical of the Black participants in it. It's if anything, it's useful in highlighting the structures that invite our corruption. But no, Juan can't see that. He couldn't see it then, he can't see it still.
All comes back to this idea that I think has been best articulated here by Peter, that somehow the film would have served best as propaganda. And
look at that, crisis in former Yugoslavia. Wow, that's wild. I didn't notice that. That's where I was in 1993. The USS John F. Kennedy was being used by the Clinton administration to dissolve the former Yugoslavia. And I remember I've shared this before, but because part of my job was to push weapons up to the flight deck that would be dropped on human beings. And in this case, we were loading pallets of paper to go up to the flight deck to be dropped on people in the former Yugoslavia. And I remember, because obviously it wasn't in English, and I remember asking my division officer, what are we doing? What does it say? And we was like, it's none of your business. He probably didn't know himself, but he was saying it's none of your business. It's propaganda. You don't qualify to know. Just push it up. It's the same way as a bomb. Again, the communicative bomb. You don't know where that bomb is going. You don't know you don't know the specs of that bomb. That's not your job. Your job is to push it up to the elevator. So there, that's where I was. I was helping. I was a cog in the machine, helping to destroy what was left of the socialist bloc.
The failure of the film in his mind is that it didn't serve that purpose. And then he will say that if Spike Lee would say that he's a filmmaker who happens to be Black as opposed to a Black filmmaker, then somehow you would never expect anything from such a person.
Every film is propaganda from my perspective.
Right.
Every film.
So there is no such thing as art. There would
no,
that's right.
Exactly.
So there would be no such.
In this context, in particular in this context, there is no such thing as just art, just entertainment. It is all propaganda and psychological warfare. And the more you like it, the more you have to be critical of it. So Bailey, yes, was ahead of his time.
Such thing as an artistic film about Malcolm X. I disagree. I think you could do that.
Propaganda can be done artistically.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because when you look at...
I think you could do a film that would challenge American society, be less conventional, and I think the film could have done much more in that way. I am very concerned, though, when I see people who would take every effort of let's say a Richard Wright or now a Spike Lee and say that it does not conform to their standards of how Black America should be presented and therefore ill serves the community. I think that is basically putting every artist in some sort of harness that would limit their creativity.
So what Juan is saying is be depoliticized, be politically uneducated, have no clear ideological or political stance or perspective, have no frame, have no analysis, have no interpretation, and just sit there as an empty receptacle letting the media wash over you because the artist has the right to do whatever they want. He just got finished listening to people explain there is a whole Hollywood structure with a history of racism and financial incentive to produce bullshit. So how can you sit there? How can he still sit there and make this and claim it's a good faith argument?
Creativity.
I agree with you, but there are more scripts in Hollywood that do accurately challenge the status quo and that do accurately represent African American life in a more full and rich, kind of way that will never be made. I mean, the scripts are there, the people are there to produce them, and they're not made because those decisions are made by Hollywood.
Exactly, Juan.
It's an economic and political system that, it's a reality.
I don't want to cut anybody off.
Exactly, Juan. But again, what I would not have understood in 1993 and sometimes still lose sight of today is that Juan is not there to have a good faith argument or discussion where he could likely be changed and converted over and changed. You know what? Michael Parenti just died. I just assigned a lecture of his to my students, and he starts off the lecture by making this point about bad faith, false pretension in arguments. That he knows he's not going to, he knows there's nothing Bailey is going to say that day that's going to at any way change his mind, even if he knew internally, quietly, that Bailey is right or that Jones is right. He's only there, his whole raison d'etre, his whole career as Juan Williams has been to be the black face that disrupts any progressive conversation. But they do come back. So when I said there was they do come back to the
in your mind,
and it comes up during the Q&A session.
And say that.
So at first I thought I heard the and then I said wow, and then I said and then it seemed like Bailey got away with it, and then we got to the Q&A, and the first question, the very first question. Well, hear it for yourself.
We'll get back to the point you want to make. So tell us who you are and ask a quick question, please.
My name is Aaron Brickman, and I'm a student here at AU in the School for International Service. Mr. Bailey, I agreed with most of what you said, up until the point about Jewish Americans. Unfortunately, I lost all respect for you as soon as you said that. I would like you to expand on the point about Jews that we don't know about. What, in your mind, do we not know about the Jews of this country, sir?
Well, first of all, your losing respect for me does not cause me a lot of problems. But
you do owe him an answer.
What I said was,
and even that line, oh my God, you do owe him an answer. Bailey does a very good job here, in as I think as well as could be done. What do you mean I owe him an answer? I don't owe him He's not owed an answer, in part because he's asking a bad faith question that he clearly doesn't want a real answer to and doesn't want to engage in good faith in the first place. That's part of my problem with this whole thing about we don't have an analysis of Jews. Part of the problem is also that creates that lack of analysis is that Jews are often not Jews often don't have an appropriate analysis of themselves. And then only want to engage these discussions to set the limits on black critique. There's no good faith effort to engage the critique on its own merit or to engage the person making the critique in a good faith, honest way, looking to understand and assess with self-criticism why the perspectives that exist do. So but okay.
What I said was that the Jewish community in this country is very, very powerful. And I admire that power because they're able to protect and defend their interests. And if we could only do it in the same way,
so this is I don't like. I understand what he's doing. I don't like that framing in part because it starts to set the course for black people saying we can do what Jews did, whether financial literacy wise or other. And the point should be, to the extent Jews have achieved certain levels of power, certainly relative to black people in greater degree, the question should be how and why. And to his previous point about what the King family had to give up to get the King holiday, what do Jews have to give up to have their relative position of power and place in this society and elsewhere that they have. Again, going back to my previous discussion on this subject, where I focused on the video with Israel Shahak, explains the history from his perspective as a European descended Jew about European Jews, and makes the point about the historical relationship Jews have played as intermediaries of power, helping power, not being the full power, not being allowed to be the full power, but serving power as an intermediary buffer group above the more oppressed communities. So in whatever society that is being discussed. So here in the United States, that pattern would fit well vis-a-vis Jews and Black people here. But the point being that Black people can't do that. Black people as a community can't play that role. Not because Black people are inferior to Jews, not because Black people are less cohesive, less clear on their history than Jews, et cetera, and so forth, but because Jews are European descendants, Jews are different in number, and Jews have redefined the definition of Jew, according to that Sands book, largely post the Second World War, into a new form that insulates a small group, allowing it, because of its relative Europeanness and whiteness, to behave, and its willingness to be complicit in whatever colonial society in order it finds itself, to aid that colonial order. So when Bailey is, and again, I understand why Black people say this, but when Bailey makes this argument, what he's in effect arguing for is for Black people to become neo-colonial compradors in colonialism, so that we can enjoy what Jews enjoy. And that the point is that can't be. Going back to earlier today, talking about GeorgeJackson, that's why what Jackson was saying is right. These structures have to be destroyed. They can't be replaced in their leadership by a few Black people, replacing Jews in this case or other whites in another case, and expecting those structures to produce different results for the rest of the community. So for Black people to do what Jews have done, Black people would have to be willing to play the role Jews have been playing in this society, which is antithetical to all the liberation that we end up talking about in the first place. I don't want a Black Zionism. I don't want a Black Zionist entity, and I don't want Black people playing the role in the United States that Jews have been consigned to play. But again, he's now having to play defense because of these absurd approaches and these fallacious approaches to these discussions.
There are movies you see all the time when we about the Jewish community fighting to keep certain things in the history books. When people start challenging the Holocaust and writing things that are different, they go after them tooth and nails. And I want to make it very clear, I am not criticizing that. I think that is exactly what a group has to do to protect its interests. I'm only saying that we, and by we I mean Black people, should follow that same strategy when promoting and defending our interests in this society.
The Jewish interests being defended, as Bailey describes, they're the projected interests claimed to be the interests of Jews, but they're really the projected interests of a Jewish ruling elite who benefit and are happy to benefit as neo-colonial compradors in whatever society, and it's done to undermine. Those positions are taken to undermine whatever radicalism exists in Jewish communities, whatever legit militancy and radicalism exists in Jewish communities. Remember, as Annie Zirin wrote in my favorite essay about this years ago, Winston Churchill said, Brits want to support the Zionist entity of Israel being created to get rid of their problem with these radical Jews who keep wanting to create labor unions and socialism. That movement, that militancy within Jewish communities has been suppressed and replaced with a version of what is supposed to be good for the Jewish community that is really good for a ruling Jewish elite. which is why, again, before he fell off into wanting to discuss as an authority Black people's history, Norman Finkelstein was right in the Holocaust industry to point this out as a criticism of, and even specifically to say why Black people shouldn't look to Jews for reparations as a movement, because as he exposes in his work on reparations among Jews, it only benefits a handful of a ruling elite. It doesn't address anything regarding inequality. It doesn't address anything in terms of redistribution. It doesn't address anything in terms of upending the structures and the relationships people have to their societies. So to whatever society they're subsumed within. So again, I get what Bailey is doing here and why other Black people in similar situations make similar arguments, but I definitely want to, I would want that to be adjusted and to say, maybe to say differently, to say, as part of our national liberation project and our assumption of political power, we will not allow ourselves to be incorrectly depicted in film. When it's left with, we want to do what the Jews have done, it allows for, kind of like what I was again saying about cooperative economics being divorced from socialism or something material and clear. It allows for people to come in and say, in a very conservative, reactionary way, let's do what the Jews have done so that we can have all this money and we can have all this power and we can have all this and we can control this and we can have power over that. And again, without criticism and an assessment of the how and the why and the who and exactly what and the classes involved, we would end up with a situation of Black people trying to become compradors and sellouts and neo-colonial outposts for Western imperialism in whatever part of the world we would get this Black Zionist entity put.
That's all I am saying.
Well, why don't you answer the question, Pierre? He said to you, what don't we know about Jewish people?
And then why is Juan Williams coming back at this? To be the Black man saying, no, he's saying, look, hire me. I'm not a threat like Peter. I'm going to throw Peter under the bus to show you what a real Black representative can be in these spaces. And again, Juan isn't advocating that we have some better analysis of Jews versus Black people. He's not advocating some honest assessment or engagement or some criticism of the Jews who participated in the development of Hollywood to the detriment of Black people and did so to the detriment of radical politics being disseminated in film. And again, look at that. I think one of my favorite points that what's his name makes in the Jews Who Invented Hollywood book is that he points out that the fact that the first criticism from Hollywood of the Nazis didn't come from Jews. They didn't want to use their power in Hollywood to provoke the hostilities among the Gentiles and to draw attention to themselves. It wasn't until the Gentiles and the military and the geopolitics of this country found it acceptable to challenge Hitler that Jews in Hollywood started producing criticism. So the point being that for all this power Jews are supposed to have, they're still only willing to, or only able to wield it in service of this settler colony. So why would we want to do that? Why would we advocate Black people? And then Juan isn't willing to investigate this or raise criticisms of this history either. He just wants to leave Bailey out there to struggle on the vine of the Black anti-Semite.
In America.
What don't we know about Anglo-Saxon people? What don't we know about Black people? That's not a question.
Okay.
What don't we know about Jewish people? What are you saying?
Sir, all I was asking was for you to answer the direct.
Okay, then what?
Was the question.
What don't we know about Jewish people? What don't we know about Black people?
So again, with all these years of hindsight and time to see this now for my third time, I think this is now my third, right? I would have preferred the answer to be, what we don't know about Jewish people is the history that led them to be complicit in many ways in this society with the settler colonial project. And that in defense of their relationship, their friendly partnership with settler colony, with the settler colonial rulers. European descended Jews have been willing to redefine what Judaism is and what Jews are, have been willing to suppress the radicalism in their own community and abandon and throw their own community under the bus. I mean, a lot of that Red Scare purge in Hollywood had to do with the neo-colonial comprador sellouts betraying the communist Jews in Hollywood and destroying their careers and getting rid of them. I mean, honestly, I grew up, Elie Wiesel, I knew that name in my household because forever part of the mantra of slogans that I got growing up was, dude is a sellout because he betrayed the radicals in Hollywood. So that could have been a really good answer. What we don't know, what we don't see depicted in film, what we don't see projected in the history of Jews in any sense, never mind a popular sense, is that transition, is what Neil Gabler writes about in The Jews That Invented Hollywood. Again, you could even do it in a way, as Gabler did, that is respectful to the people in the history. Jews escaping white colonial violence in Europe came over here, and a handful of them, it's not all of them, a handful of them that he can name and identify, made very conscious decisions to accept what was available to them. Hollywood was not something that Gentiles invented and then gave to Jews, or it was what Jews were allowed to have access to as a variation of whites, but not the real whites, that the elite Gentiles didn't want. To this day, the elite Gentiles still only want their opera and their certain theater and ballet and all that. They don't care about these Hollywood films. That's why let the Jews have it, as long as they use it for what we want it for. Psychological warfare, settler colonial politics, militarism, so on and so forth. So that's what Peter Bailey could have said. We could have had a whole conversation about that. Let's talk about, and was Gabler's book first published by this time in 93? I don't know, maybe not. But let's talk about that part. What we don't get in films, what we don't know about Jews that we don't see in film, is this history of escaping European imperialist violence and pogroms, and having that trauma lead to decisions that had a few among the Jews say, we will happily put this thing in Hollywood together, and we will give you all the racism and all the misogyny and all the stereotypes that you need. And we won't say boo about your boy Hitler until you say it's okay. And then, oh man, the video I did about the Five Came Back documentary, where they talk about the I forgot his name, one of those foundational post or World War II Jewish filmmakers was introduced to the realities of Black suffering in the military and racism in the military, and said, I won't participate in the propaganda that promotes, that erases that. He was so traumatized by it, he said he would rather go and become a bomber flying over Germany. Lost his hearing in the process. And I thought, how deep? At least according to that Spielberg documentary, this one filmmaker said, I would rather go to the front and fight and risk my life than stay here in the United States and create a fake propaganda film that erases the racism in the military so that we can get more Black people to join up. But again, all of that could have been discussed, but we don't get that. We're unfortunately stuck with this whole thing of Bailey trying to play defense and everybody just wanting to dismiss him. And as the questioner said, having lost all respect for you. Everything, all of your analysis was great until you raised this question about Jews. And at no point does anyone say, well, if all of his analysis was so good elsewhere, why are we going to so quickly be willing to throw him out because he says something here that we don't agree with or feel uncomfortable about? Why don't we have an honest conversation about it? But we're not allowed to. We're not allowed to. And no, it's not just because Jews run everything. Blah, 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 blah. It's because Jews have been fit to play a certain political role and a function in this settler colonial project that cannot be exposed or discussed in any meaningful way. It has to be left at Jews run everything or everybody else is anti-Semitic, and that's the only kind of conversations we're allowed to have. And it is super, super, super whack. And my biggest problem with it is that I think it inhibits mostly the Black political conversations and analyses of Jews, and why we end up with misapplied anger, or in this case, misapplied comparisons.
What don't we know about Anglo-Saxons? What don't we know about Polish people? I mean, there are a lot of things that we don't know about a lot of people in this country. I don't really understand. I personally, I'm serious. I do not understand the question.
Well, if I may interpret,
I have no problems answering it if someone will make it clear.
It seemed to me that what he was saying is that you raised the point. You said in an earlier statement, there are things that you could not portray in a film about Jewish people in America. And I think he was asking, what are those things?
Now, again, he could have used, I don't think the film was made yet, or was it made? Had he already made Mo Better Blues? Hold on. When did Spike Lee make Mo Better Blues? Was that before or after Mo Better Blues, before or after Malcolm X? Yeah, Mo Better Blues was already out. So Mo Better Blues had already come out in 1990. So Bailey could have responded just using Spike's films. He could have said, look at what Spike's criticism, look at this criticism Spike got in a film he made where he had two Italian actors, brothers in real life. I forgot what's their names again. They're brothers in real life, but they're Italian actors who were depicting Jewish jazz club owners. And they were depicted in a stereotypical, the Jews own the business and they're frugal and this, that, and the third. Now, it's stereotypical in the criticism of Jews and being money hungry and owning everything and this, that, and the third, but it's also accurate in the context of jazz club relationships. But Spike got a lot of criticism for that film as being anti-Semitic and this, that, and the third because of so Bailey could have said Spike's own films have been criticized because they depicted a hostile relationship between Jewish jazz club owners and Black jazz artists, as if there's not a lot of real life history around that. Now, what I would have wanted to say is Spike's Mo Better Blues shouldn't have been criticized for having those depictions of Jews. If there's a criticism I would have of it, it's the same thing I'm saying here. The depiction of Jews in that relationship with Black people is not explained in a historical materialist context. It's just left out there as if Jews magically end up owning everything and being hostile to Black people. So it doesn't invite us to evolve an analysis. Jews hating Black people is not an analysis. Even if it is a reality, it's not an analysis. Even if it's a depiction of a reality, it's not an analysis of how we got there. So which I think undermines, most importantly, again, Black analysis and political interpretation and framing.
Okay, I want to ask you a question. Could I, as a Black filmmaker, make a film in this country that said that the Holocaust is a myth? Could I, as a Black filmmaker, make a film that even suggests that?
What would that be telling people about Jews that they didn't know?
And I hate to admit this, but this is why I'm saying what I'm saying. First of all, again, I'm operating with hindsight, 30 years, this, that, and the third. I would not have even done this well if I was in Bailey's spot, especially in 1993, maybe not even today. But with this level of detachment, I do think it's important to point out that what Hitchens said there is slick, and he's right. The question was framed in a narrow way as a trap. So when Bailey is offering this question of could I make a film about the Holocaust not existing, that's not answering the question, and it is in some ways missing the point, or it's not making the point that I think it needs to be making. But yeah, anyway.
I'm asking that question.
But I don't think you're answering the question that has been asked now by two.
And that's why I like, everybody keeps giving me a hard time about Frank Wilderson and Afro-pessimism, but Frank has always said the power is in the power to ask the question. And they're demonstrating that here. He's trying to ask a question like, no, we asked you the question. You answer the question we asked. We're not here to answer the question you want to ask. So it sets him up where the whole panel now is turned on him and the audience is turned on him. And we've already moved away from a conversation about Malcolm X and this whack ass film, or a conversation about an actual relationship between Black people and Jews, or an actual comparison between liberation struggles of Black people and Jews.
Two people of you to further explain the statement that you made. You made a statement. Why won't you answer the question about the statement you made?
I don't understand the question. What about Jewish people we don't know?
You said that. You're the one who said that.
I did not say that.
Well, in that case.
He didn't say that. What he said was Jews would not allow a film to be made that negatively depicts them without exercising their power and their organizational strength to come down on that project. So they've accepted the questioner's reframing of the question and turned the whole thing upside down. And I'm saying, because I don't think the Black community has evolved or been allowed to evolve a proper analysis of Jews, that Bailey gets caught in this crossfire. And again, it's not even fair to say it that way, because it's not like this is a legit, it's more, yeah, it is a crossfire. It's not a situation where it's meant to be legit exchange. And they're not there to have an honest conversation with him about Jews and their relationship to Black people. They're attempting, without saying it, to just say he's an anti-Semite and therefore should be dismissed in his entirety. But
I think
I think we should probably just go
I think we're going to move on.
Let me close very quickly.
I think we're going to move on.
What I was saying, if it was misinterpreted, I was admiring the ability and the power of the Jewish people in this country to promote and defend their interests. That's what I was doing.
I think we'll take that as a clarification.
But
and move on to the next question.
Jews and those, well, anyone not wanting to have, and it's not just Jews, anyone not wanting to have an honest conversation about this will take what Peter said as him saying Jews have an undue, an unwarranted or undue authority and power that they're wielding unlike anybody else. That's what they're saying he's saying. And I think posing a more aggressive response along the lines I'm suggesting here would have been better. But
I also think that you're in danger when you say indicate my.
I wanted to come back to a little bit of the exchange here between
slight, but I hope noticeable dissent. Look,
Bailey.
Everybody knows what a serious topic this is. We're talking about the struggle for liberation of the only large group of people who did not come to America of their own free will and who used to be property. Okay? You would, I think, be surprised how many people have got that point and realize and appreciate the seriousness of it. The difference I have with you is really when you say that if there's anything good in the movie, it's Brother Lee. If there's anything bad, it is Warner Brothers. I have not heard Mr. Lee say, I'd have made a better film if Warner Brothers didn't give me $40 million. If he wants to say it, he has enough money, and I would hope enough courage to say so. I
agree with that part too. Spike wasn't attempting to make a better film that he was held back from by Warner's. He was attempting to make the film he made, and that's why he was able to secure the funding.
I think that you're in danger when you say all art is propaganda, of basically saying that all propaganda is art or would be considered artistic by you as long as it was made by Black people. Now,
no,
and that's not what he said either. And I'm glad he's about to challenge this too. He didn't say that. So Hitchens is again, now he's, it's like a lot of sometimes thoughtful white folks. When race and black people get involved, they lose their place.
Well, that's what you said, or that's what you were broadly hinting.
That's not what he was broadly hinting either.
Someone else's opinion was of very much interest to you, which is, of course, you're right. But I'll give you an example from the movie and the autobiography that will face you, if I'm correct, with a choice. On the chickens coming home to roost, which you said you thought tactically should not have been said, the, in my view, perfectly brilliant speech made by Malcolm X about the murder of Kennedy and what
it wasn't a speech, it was a response to a question in a press conference.
Meant in terms of the culture of assassination and destabilization. You said tactically you'd rather that hadn't been made. Actually, the real trouble in real life that Malcolm X got into was over saying that he didn't care about the crash of a plane load of white travel agents in Chicago, because why should he care about a plane load of crackers, which I think you'll agree is a different statement culturally and intellectually from saying that there was some revenge involved in to the culture of violence in the murder of the president. Now, in the movie there is a moment, which everyone remembers, where a young, concerned, honky woman of the kind we're all used to condescending to, and anyone who can pronounce the word empowerment knows how to despise people like this, she comes up to Malcolm and his group at Columbia and she says, look, I would really like to do something to help, and I'd like to know what it is. And he says, nothing. There's nothing you can do. She turns away. And SpikeLee, who dodges all really important political questions in the film, is not above sending racial thrills of this kind through audiences. And so I thought it was appalling that that story, which indeed appears in the autobiography, is only told in the autobiography because Malcolm X says he wishes he now knew where that girl was. Because he wished he hadn't said that to her, and he wished he could find her and talk to her. Has little more respect for the opinions of some white people say than you do, to make my point direct, and is not going to make innuendos about whether they're Anglo-Saxon, Polish, or Jewish either. In other words, isn't a tribalist.
So again, Hitchens is showing again that black people are not the only ones who have no analysis of Jews, particularly as it relates to this country. Maybe this was a shortcoming of his not being an American citizen or growing up here. To put the label of tribalism on Bailey as if Jews, Poles, Irish, and others don't have their own versions of it is absurd. But most specifically, it's absurd if we're trying to assess the history of this country and how Jews ended up being as they often are in certain sectors of the economy or the society. So the question isn't, are Jews in this case prevalent in Hollywood? The question would be why? And that's that. So it's not about a descent into tribalism or narrow nationalism. It's about a reality that has a history that is traceable, that is beyond mystery and mysticism. And maybe this is why he would end up supporting the Iraq War, because he doesn't have an appropriate analysis of the tribalism that is imposed and is constructed and entirely outside of the purview and influence of black people.
Now, if I ask you this question, do you think that Malcolm X was right to say that in his book about the girl? And if you don't think so,
right
why
to say
not?
that he was sorry?
That he was sorry, and do you agree that's what he did say? And if not, why not? And if that is the state of affairs in the book, is it Warner Brothers' fault that Spike Lee opens that quotation mark in the film and then fails to close it again and leaves people with a deformed impression of what the politics of the movie and indeed this discussion.
And again, this is where I'm back to agreeing with Hitchens, that the shortcomings in this case are Spike Lee's fault, at least initially, because I've never seen it, and I don't believe that it exists outside of what I've seen, that Spike Lee was attempting to make a more radical version, a film about Malcolm, and was inhibited and held back by Warner Brothers. In fact, even in the exchange I had with him at Towson University years ago, where I asked him a critical question about the film, his response to me was Malcolm wasn't a communist. Malcolm wasn't a Marxist. So, and the reason I was asking him that was because his whole presentation about Malcolm in the film was promoting him as a liberal Democrat who well, just that, a liberal Democrat. So my point is that in this case, Hitchens is correct in raising the in saying, look, Spike Lee had a lot to do with this, and the reason I would say that again that he got the support ultimately not just from Warner but from Oprah and Cosby is because they knew he was making the film that wasn't upsetting to their class position.
Really are.
Well, I think that he himself said that he was sorry he made that statement.
Yes.
Malcolm X did say, and I have the statement that he made, that those whites who are sincere, this is a change, should work in their own communities. That's what he said. He said that he found that those whites, quote, who accepted Islam, end of quote, had been able to transcend racism. We got to be very careful about what he said about this. So what he did, which by making that statement about sincere, but you would be surprised, I worked in the movement in the 60s, what a difficult time that we had getting that concept through to white people. They all wanted to work in Harlem. And we kept telling them, go to Bayside, go to Bensonhurst, organize out there. That's where you can organize. We can't go out there. They didn't want to hear it. They wanted to come to Harlem. And I tell you very frankly, we regarded that as a missionary concept, and we resented it tremendously. Mm-hmm. And the change in Brother Malcolm from what he was saying when he was in the nation and what he said was the OAAU was his statement that those whites who were sincere should organize and work in their own communities because this is where the problem was and where they could be most effective. There were not going to be any white members of the OAAU, the Organization of Afro-American Unity. That I can guarantee you.
So I'm going to get to this part here because this was one of my favorite parts to see Sister Asantewaa show up because for those of us in this area, nobody would be surprised to see Asantewaa there or to hear what she has to say. Sister missed very few events and misses them still, as I'm aware, up in Philadelphia, where I think she is now. But I saw this, and I was waiting during the Q&A. Am I going to see somebody I recognize or know? And sure enough,
out of the movie, you lived through it and you knew Malcolm. As someone who's been researching Malcolm, though, and I'd like to give thanks.
Problems of America.
Let me get to what.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Asantewaa Nkrumah Toure, and I'd like to give thanks and praises to Brother Peter Bailey. I agree with you, brother. There were a lot of different things left out of the movie. You lived through it and you knew Malcolm. As someone who's been researching Malcolm, though, as the brother said, the things that were left out were very significant. Malcolm X made a speech called Message to the Grassroots. That wasn't there. Malcolm X met Fidel Castro at the Hotel Teresa in Harlem. That wasn't there. Malcolm X visited Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, correct me if I'm wrong, brother, and some other countries in Africa, and he met the revolutionary leaders of that time, Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, Modibo Keita, Amilcar Cabral, Oliver Tambo, et cetera, et cetera. He also met Nasser when he was in Egypt. He wasn't just riding around on a camel as a tourist, okay? When Malcolm X was in Egypt meeting with Nasser, they had meetings and discussions about Zionism. Malcolm X wrote an article called Zionist Logic, and in that article he equated Zionism with American imperialism, American dollarism. He supported the rights of the Palestinians. That was not in the movie for obvious reasons. So to get back to this gentleman's question here, art is a form of propaganda. It sells an idea. It gets people thinking certain types of things. And because these things and others were left out, people have a certain view about Malcolm. It's a distorted view, and they're making a view based on a lie. And for our young people, for African young people, that's very dangerous. We want the truth to our young people. And to the gentleman back here, I know for a fact that Warner Brothers put political pressure on Spike Lee about that movie because they asked him, a brother who was a consultant to the movie, how are you going to deal with Malcolm and his visit to the Middle East? Well, that was an obvious reason for that question. They didn't want to have on that film Malcolm talking about Palestinians. That's a bad word these days, particularly in light of the Middle East peace talks. You will never see in a movie in America anyway a man named Lenny Brenner, who's a European anti-Zionist Jew. And he speaks all around the country, but you don't have him on PBS. There are a number of Jews around the world who are of different races who were organizing and speaking out against the creation of the State of Israel, but you will not have them on TV too. So as the brother said, art and propaganda are very related, and for our people, as oppressed and exploited as we have to make a conscious decision that art and every other skill that we have as a people must serve our liberation, and if it does not, you will face the consequences.
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
Perfect way to wrap it up. Don't even need to hear their responses. Nobody had a response that was that dope, but to that part. But I'll put the link in the show description if you all want to watch the whole thing to the extent that we didn't here today. But yeah, and how unfortunately, oddly, perfectly timed that in 2026 the genocide in Palestine continues, and anti-Zionist Jews are still marginalized. This is part of the exact point I'm making, why we don't have a proper analysis of Jews. So that could have been something that Bailey could have said that day in response to that question. What do we not know about Jews that's not depicted in film? Their radicalism. I've talked before about how Jews have talked about how Jews don't want to make movies about depicting their revolutionary violence against the Nazis. And to this day, again, I'm only aware of one film coming out of Hollywood, one major motion picture film, at least, coming out of Hollywood, depicting Jews in armed resistance against the Nazis. And even with its relative star power, had old boy from 007 and the other dude from Wolverine, X-Men, and all that, it didn't do that well. And some of the discussions that I've talked about previously, Jews in even and around that ridiculous ultimately series Hunters, where the revolutionary violence of Jews against Nazis is undermined by Al Pacino, in fact, being an undercover Nazi. Oh my God, that series was so diabolical too. But the point being that Jews have talked about how Jews have not wanted to write about or tell those stories because the negative connotations around armed struggle and wanting to again, similar to what Two Black was saying about the civil rights struggle, wanting to tap into the conscience of the enemy and the oppressor. And chose a different tactic in terms of avoiding that history. So, but yeah, and in fact, as Asante has said, the Spike Lee film, doesn't even address the question of Malcolm going to the Middle East. It barely addresses at all him going to the continent of Africa. So anyway, yeah, the joint with Pacino, the Hunters. I thought the Hunters thing was terrible. Because of that fact, because of how they did Pacino's character. Exactly. He was not just riding around as a camel on a Taurus. But that was the other thing that she raised, that Asante raised, that the film doesn't do. That we don't get any of the discussion of Malcolm's criticism of Zionism, barely any of his criticism of capitalism. And Defiance was the name of the film. Yeah, you're right. Escape from Sobibor and The Gray Zone. I don't even know those other two films. Are these major motion picture films? I mean, I'm happy to be wrong if there have been more, but I haven't seen The Gray Zone or let's see, let me see what these films are. Because if they're depicting armed struggle against the Nazis, I will check them out. So The Gray Zone is 2001. David Arquette. Is that the same movie? Title comes from a chapter of the book, The Drowned and the Saved, by Holocaust survivor Primo Levi. The film tells the story of Jewish Sonderkommando Sonderkommando 12 in Auschwitz in October 1944. These prisoners were made to assist the camp's guards in shepherding their victims to the gas chambers and then disposing of their bodies. So where's the insurrection begins and the crematorium is destroyed with smuggled explosives. All of the prisoners who survived the explosions and gunfights with the SS are captured. They're held until the fire in the crematorium is extinguished, after which they are executed. But David Arquette and Steve Buscemi, Harvey Keitel, Mira Sorvino, they're not no names, but I don't know. Is that a $500,000 in box office, released in October of 2002? I don't even remember this movie coming out at all. But okay. And Escape from Sobibor. 1987. Oh, wow. A British television film, so it's definitely not a major motion picture film. Starring Rutger Hauer. So we're already definitely not talking about elite films here. Alan Arkin was in it, based on 1983 book of the same name. It did get Golden Globe Award for Best Miniseries. Underground resistance killed 11 SS officers and a number of Ukrainian guards. Of the 600 inmates in the camp, roughly 300 escaped, although all but 50 to 70 were later recaptured and killed. After the escape, Heinrich Himmler ordered the death camp closed. It was dismantled and bulldozed. Yeah, I'm gonna hold to my point that we don't have. I think Defiance is the only one we really have. Yeah, I've talked about Zone of Interest before. I actually really liked it. I thought it was a powerful film. But just to be clear, as much as I did like it, it doesn't satisfy this point I'm making about films that depict armed resistance against the Nazis. And there, in at least in some of the articles I've read, there's at least 100 documented examples of armed resistance, but we never see or hear about it. It's just a constant barrage of death camps and bad Nazis and defenseless Jews, which was largely true. I'm not trying to say we need to rewrite the history, but I am saying, damn no. So yeah, and Hunters, the second season was worse. It was just bad. It was bad. It started off so well. I was really digging it at first. I was like, and then the reveal at the end of season one infuriated me. And yeah, I would encourage people to watch Zone of Interest. I think it's a very good film. I really liked it. It was very powerful. And I did talk about it. If there's a video on the channel somewhere about it, but yeah, I definitely would encourage people to. What year was Defiance? What year was Defiance? It's not that old because it's got, Defiant 2008. Daniel Craig and Liev Schreiber star in it. So and it was a good film. I remember liking the film. Never mind my bias, but exactly. This is again it's similar to my point there. We don't get films about the uprisings of the enslaved, and no, Django does not count. And yeah. And no, right? There's no Haitian Revolution. That's the thing that Danny Glover was trying to get done. So, All right, good people. I'm way over my normal time here. I'm gonna go ahead and move on. I appreciate you coming and hanging out. Big salute to the undefeated chat. Please do support this platform and that of Black Liberation Media. I do have a presentation on the channel, an old one from back in the day about Django and Lincoln that I had done that I actually am very proud of. It's on the channel if you all want to, revisit any of that. I did not ever review Harriet, but it was not good. And no, it's not a film about uprisings. Yeah. I am still listening to the Good Lord Bird about John Brown, which I am enjoying and we'll probably talk about here at some point. But Danny Glover was trying to do a film on the Haitian Revolution. He couldn't get the funding or anything like that, Thank you, Brittany. Appreciate jolly good Joe show chap. Jolly good chap. Smexy, thank you very much as well. Thank you, Mary E. Wong. Thank you very much. Definitely appreciate you all coming through. Please check all the stuff. Check you know what to do. Do all the things. Do all the things. I will see you, if not sooner, on Saturdays with Renee and on Black Liberation Media, and look forward to it. Again, as always, peace, everybody. Only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And I'll see you around here next time with more.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
Jared. Is Jared in class today? Jared, are you here? Oh, yes, you are.